Okay, welcome everyone to Bridging the Gap. This event is hosted by Latino World Travelers, and here we're going to engage in a dialogue about how Latinos and Black Americans can support each other, specifically during this time. I also want to say a big thank you to all of the visionaries, speakers, leaders that have joined us today, who took the leap of faith in me to join this conversation. It is a very challenging conversation, but it's one that must be had. They're all friends of mine, and I admire each and every one of you, and that's why I invited you here, because I value your diverse perspective. So really thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Also, thank you to everyone who is here joining us to listen to this conversation, to grow and learn. Thank you. Seeing what has been happening in social media lately for the past couple of weeks, I am very concerned. And that's why I wanted to use this platform as an opportunity to get into those deeper conversations within our community. I am Dominican, my husband is Black American, and we have had several conversations over the past couple of weeks about this topic. So these ideas stem from those conversations. My goal is that we engage in this conversation in a loving way. I know this topic is hard, but that is my hope, and that we are open-minded about everything that's going to be said. And just know that this is a safe space for you to share what you want to share. But first, we're going to start with a quick introduction. We have a lot of speakers today, so I am going to try my best. I'm going to share the screen first. Here, okay, here. Great. So when I mention your name, I guess introduce yourselves. You can unmute yourselves too. Welcome again to Bridging the Gap. And I am Vanessa Fonder Adams. I am the founder and CEO of Latino World Travelers and the one hosting this event. Okay, Jeremiah.
Everyone, my name is Jeremiah Adams. I am Vanessa's husband and currently a matriculating graduating student at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Graduation is actually next Sunday, so it's one of those bittersweet moments where I'm proud of my accomplishments, but you know, the world that I'm going to is a nervous and challenging world, but happy to be here.
Claudio, not sure if he's here yet. Claudio, is he here yet? I'm not sure.
I do not think he's here. I did not see his name pop up.
Okay. So let's go to the next person. Oops, sorry. Maurice.
Maurice is here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maurice Childs. I am Black American. I am currently a Spanish and ENL teacher at a middle school in the Bronx. Not originally from New York. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, but I have been living here in New York for 6 years, I believe.
Thank you. Alana?
Hi, everyone. My name is Alana Gardner. I would identify as Black American. I am the child of 2 Jamaican immigrants. I am an attorney in Manhattan.
Thank you. Kayla?
Good evening, all. My name is Gayla Gilmore. I'm a teacher here in New York City. I'm actually born and raised, currently looking to transfer into the social work world so I can do more work there. Happy to be here this evening.
Brett?
Hi everyone, I'm Brett and I'm a professor at American University. I live in Washington, D.C. Interesting time to be living here. And I'm a native of Detroit.
Thank you. Ghislaine?
Hi everyone, I am Ghislaine Leon. I'm a multicultural brand strategist and a wellnesspreneur through my platform Fearless Leon. I am born and raised in Harlem, and I'm still here in Harlem, representing and supporting the future brown girls. Happy to be here.
Princess?
Hi, my name is Princess Francois. I'm an assistant principal of a high school in Brooklyn, New York, and I identify as Haitian American and very happy to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Daisy.
Hi, everyone. Hello again. My name is Daisy. I am the Director of Operations at Latino World Travelers from New York City, born and raised. And I just want to say that I think this conversation is extremely important. I'm very glad we're having this. I am a little bit nervous, and I do admit that we do not know everything. We do not have all the answers. So please feel free to jump in at any time to correct us if needed, or to share your perspective.
Mahogany.
Hello, I'm Mahogany Ratcliffe Alberton. I'm a marketing manager for Fox Sports. And I identify as Black, although I do have Latin grandparents and white grandparents. I identify as a Black woman, and I have my feet in every little pond of the world, but that's how I see myself.
Griselda.
Hi, everyone. Greetings. My name is Griselda Rodriguez Solomon. I am a professor of sociology within the City University of New York. I'm a mother. I identify as Afro-Dominican and Black, and we can unpack that in the conversation. And along with my twin sister, we have a platform called Brujas of Brooklyn, where is a wellness platform for women of color.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sylvia?
Greetings, one and all. My name is Silvia Roldan. I am a personal development coach based in ontological methods, writer and public speaker. And I am a US Latina with Ecuadorian Guatemalan roots, born and raised in the city of Angels.
Thank you. Nidia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nidia Serrano. I am a marketer, audience marketing director at Pandora Music. I also consider myself to be a content creator and storyteller, utilizing all the platforms we have available to ensure that we are represented as people of color. I identify as Dominican, born and raised, and in terms of race, I identify as Black.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Earl? Is he here? Maybe.
I do not think Earl is here at the moment.
And Kristen?
Hi. Hello, everyone. This is Kristen. I am the CEO of my company. I'm an education consultant, so I travel around to New York City schools, teaching a number of programs in entrepreneurship, college and career readiness. I teach ESL programs, GED programs, dance programs, like a little bit of everything with the people who I work with. And I'm also the national program manager for Girls Leadership. So our mission is to train girls to utilize their voices as much as they possibly can. I'm happy to be here because I do find myself in a lot of spaces where there are lots of layered conversations around what we're here to talk about today. So I hope we can share, I hope we can connect, I hope we can provide insight, and I hope we can show just how powerful we are when we come together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for your introductions. So in this time together, I want to make sure that we share our different approaches to all the problems that we're going to encounter right now. And at the same time, develop solutions. That is the most important part. That's why we're here. How can we move forward? So I would like to welcome Griselda. She's going to introduce us to this platform with a breathing exercise so we can all be in the right mindset and space and presence right here. Thank you.
Gri, take it away.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Latino World Travelers, for the platform and for. Can you hear me?
Oh,
and for
I can hear
asking for a brief breathing meditation, because we know these conversations are very difficult because what what we're all gonna do is tap into some ancestral trauma, and we know that trauma can be a difficult thing to face. So I just invite everyone, if it's comfortable for you, to close your eyes. If not, to look at something maybe a foot in front of you, so that your gaze is not on the screen. You're not looking at me. You're not looking at your screen. You're going inward, right? Relax the shoulders, pulling them away from the ears, bringing the chest up as if your heart is beaming light out into the sky. Love, we know that this is what we are being called to do, to rise to the occasion and be entities of light and love. And take a very deep breath in through the nose, slowly opening the belly first. This is a conscious yogic breath, and then allowing the lungs to open with air. And when you get to the top of the breath, release it through the nose by contracting the belly. If you're pregnant, release through the mouth, but if not, release through the nose, contract the belly back. Inhale deeply again, bringing the breath down to the belly, opening the belly, allowing the diaphragm room so that your lungs can have more space to increase in capacity. Exhale through the nose, contract the belly back. The power of the breath is actually in how long we can exhale. Inhale, breath is so powerful. We can go hours or days without food and water. We can only go minutes without air. Exhale through the nose, contract the belly back. And one last time, a very deep conscious breath in through the nose, pushing the shoulders away from the ears, opening the belly, and then feeling the lungs filled with beautiful life-affirming oxygen. When you get to the top of the breath, exhale through the nose, contracting the belly back, squeezing the belly, and then squeezing the lungs. And now at your own pace, continue with this rhythm of inhaling by opening up the belly through the nose, and then exhaling through the nose, contracting the belly. May we set an intention of love and honesty. We are bound to be honest in all that we do, especially in these conversations that can be difficult. May we speak from our truth. May we speak from love. And may we know that all things have divine order. Nothing comes up to hurt us. It is all here to heal us. We are all one people, not just this whole human experience, but people of African descent. And that's a very important reality, because Africa is home. Our ancestors need us to come together, to heal wounds, and to unite as one, because there's strength in numbers. So may we all sit for the next few seconds, and in the silence of your heart, set your own personal intentions for the next hour or so of this conversation. And now slightly smile, truly inhale deeply through the nose, open the belly, and then open the chest. Really fill yourself with this beautiful, beautiful life-affirming oxygen, and then exhale through the nose. And when you're ready, come back to the space, slowly open your eyes and be here. Thank you, Anissa.
Thank you so much. I also, something happened with the presentation and it skipped Shakira. I'm so sorry about that. So Sakura Jones is also our speaker. Do you mind introducing yourself?
No worries. My name is Sakura Jones. In real world, I work in technology and cybersecurity and applications in healthcare. But my true passion is being a wine writer and educator. Writing a lot in the spaces about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the spaces of food and wine. I identify as a Black woman, although I was born in Belize, Central America. My great-grandfather is from Chetumal, Mexico. Half my family speaks fluent Spanish. For me, my racial identity is a lived experience. So I identify as a Black woman, and I am happy to be in this space to discuss this very important topic. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, guys, so let's start with the topic of Latinos and Blackness. Where were you born? Did you immigrate here? Do you identify with the Black American experience? And who are you? What can you tell us about that?
Don't everybody all jump at once, huh?
I am happy to start that. Well, I was born in Southern LA County. I grew up in a time where Latino was not even a term. It was all about brown pride. I was grounded in my family's history, and that history was diverse. It was European, it was African, it was indigenous, and yet my experience with the Black community came through schooling, because I grew up in a predominantly, I even hesitate to say Latino and Black, because Latino is so inclusive of so many different things, and that right there causes issues. However, at the time when I was growing up, that distinction was made. There's a Black American population and a Latino population that tended to be on the browner side of life. But it was before that, and in fact, my dad posted this week, it was his experience with his coworker, a boss, who was a Black man in the 70s, who befriended him, who mentored him, who became his best friend, that became an opportunity for humanity, for Blackness to be human in my family, which then encouraged more interaction and more acceptance. And so when I am seen in the Latino community, I will hear things such as, wow, bailas como negra, means you dance like a Black woman. So that right there tells you a lot of different things. Or I speak, oh, when you speak like a Black girl. But there's still that distinction. So I leave you with that and tell you that my perspective is an inclusive one, but I'm acutely aware of how the world perceives and chooses to define me. Not that I accept it.
I agree wholeheartedly with Sylvia. As I said, I'm from Central America. I was born in Belize. I moved to the Bronx when I was 6. And I too find this new term of Afro-Latina to be very conflicting for me, in that by the definition set for it, I fall into that box. However, I think there is a problem with that being a separate thing. I believe that racial identity in America often is tied to what you can pass for. And because I've never been able to pass for anything but Black, I am Black. And that has been my lived experience throughout my life. In my own country, though, in Central America, my mother is substantially darker than I am. So both in our country and here, it's always been very clear to me the privilege that being fairer skin brings, as opposed to being of a darker hue. Ironically, even seeing that, I always wanted to be darker. I always wanted to look more like my mother, because that's the example for womanhood that I have. I think that as we go on the road to healing, I think some definitions often are the source of our conflict. I think that race, ethnicity, culture, and racial identity are not all the same thing. And I think that that is what puts us oftentimes in a very gray area in not knowing what to be. I think, yeah, you can be Afro-Latino, but I don't know that many, I mean, even separating out Hispanic from Latin, right? Latin Americans are from a place in the world. Hispanic is a culture. And so I think that clearing up those definitions are often the starting point for speaking a universal language and for healing. So I'm happy to see where this conversation goes.
Thank you, Shakira. I think I share a lot of some of your sentiments that you just expressed. Like I mentioned in my introduction, I'm Nidia Serrano. I was born and raised in Dominican Republic. I came to this country in 1998, where I was just a freshman in high school. And growing up in DR, it was very clear to me that I was somewhat the darkest person in my circle, even there, right? I come from a country where when you look around, most of the population is, by appearances, is Black by US standards. But when you survey that population, and these are just some numbers that I pulled up, about 70% of Dominicans identify as mixed. So mestizo, Indio, 70%. and only 15% identify as Black. Growing up, that was very evident because people will call me, I'm wearing the shirt on purpose, morenita, la negra. Sometimes they'll call me Haitiana as a way to, there's a lot of race relations when it comes to Haiti, Dominican Republic. They'll call me Haitian as a way to put me down or as a way to other me from other Dominicans. And even at a young age, I was about like 5 years old when that was happening, I knew that there was something wrong with that. So I have some thoughts around identity. I think identity is fluid, is based on your experiences, is based on your location, and is based on who you share those experiences with, right? Because in the Dominican Republic, I never consider myself to be a Latina. Over there, you're just a person, you're Dominican, but you are treated a certain way depending on what shade of Black you are. Over here, when I came, I found a lot of commonalities with Dominicans, no matter the color. We all had that shared experience of leaving our country and coming to a place that was very, very foreign to us. And thus we share the same languages and all of that. And in high school, I didn't find commonalities with other Latinos. There was a lot of separation between Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Blacks. There was a lot of separation there. And then in college, I found commonality not only with Latinos, but also with Black people. So I think it all goes back to this in research it's called like correspondence mapping, is in the second you throw something that's different from your group, it groups you with other people where you have more commonalities. And when we force certain identities upon people, we're really taking away that experience and that background and everything that make up who they are. And thus it requires a lot of dialogue and conversations to allow people to heal and come together. That's why I'm glad we're all coming together from so many different backgrounds.
Yeah, so
no, sorry. I just wanted to just give a quick perspective. And I am Black American. I grew up I was born in South Carolina. Moved to Brooklyn, New York when I was 2. I think the interesting thing for me is that I don't think I actually knew what the word Latino was or had heard it until I reached college. And the reason why that's interesting is because before, I think sort of neighborhood superseded race. In fact, in the neighborhood that I grew up in Flatbush, my family was actually kind of one of the only Black American families. Everyone in my neighborhood, they were Panamanian, Jamaican, Bayesian, or Haitian. We literally were like a small handful of Black Americans. So we associated with all of them, and we'd never heard anything other than Black in our neighborhood. And it didn't matter. You could be light skinned, but that didn't mean you were Latino. That just meant that you just were perhaps just a light skinned Black person. And I literally didn't get to understand the differentiation until I got to a university level where they started to ask you questions like, who do you identify with? And that was my first exposure to it. And so I found all this, fascinating in terms of the question, that there is a question. I didn't realize it until I got a lot older.
I'd like to piggyback on that because growing up in Florida, there was 2 questions. I remember every year we did like a census in class, and it was, if you're Black, raise your hand. And if you're white, raise your hand. And I had just found out the background of my grandfather, who I've never met. And he was Puerto Rican. And I was sitting next to a Puerto Rican guy, and he raised his hand for white. And I looked at him like, you're darker than me, dude. Like, what's going on? And so there was nothing else for you to choose, Black or white. There's no in the middle, nothing. And you chose white. And that's when I realized that everybody does not identify the same. And that's your experience, or what your parents teach you, or, what your environment is. And so I just thought that you hadn't learned of Latin because it was you choose Black or you choose white. There's no in between. You don't get anything else. There's no other identifiers. That's all you got. So, you know, all this is kind of new to a lot of us that are older. Not, you know, I ain't old, but I'm just saying older.
Yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn, and growing up, I grew up in predominantly African American, what we would identify as African American communities, Black American communities, and Puerto Rican. So being Dominican, like in my junior high school, there were 4 Dominicans, my twin sister and I, and 2 others. So growing up, identity was always a very interesting conversation because I grew up around a very Black experience, with music and aesthetics and all. I mean, I was fully immersed in a Black experience in outside of my home, but at home in my family, I grew up around a lot of anti-Black racism. You know, my family's Black. My family comes in all shades of brown, but they are predominantly, you know, darker skin. And I grew up around a lot of, you know, Black people are this, or Haitians are this. And it was just incessant. And it wasn't until, and then I went to a very like Pan-African, Afrocentric junior high school. And I think that that's what, in reflecting, that's what really grounded my identity now, in consciously choosing to identify as a Black woman, because I realized that Dominican Republic is such a Black African country. You know, we've been conditioned to identify closer to our oppressor because there is status in that, you know, the lighter skin that you are, or like Mahogany, you were explaining Puerto Ricans, there's an investment in identifying with whiteness. And this is not just Latinos, you know, Jamaicans, Ghanaians, it's a colonial thing. I think Shakira, you put it about colorism. It's a thing that was ingrained in us because it's profitable. If we hate ourselves, we are divided amongst ourselves. And in the US, in a capitalist context, if we hate ourselves, we are led to believe that we can consume something and buy some things to make ourselves feel better. But it wasn't until I got to college where I really started to awaken to my Blackness. And when I went to Senegal to study abroad in West Africa, that's when it really hit me, because I was in a landmass that was ancestrally connected to my people. And I was like, holy shit, Dominicans are Black. That was like my moment. So for a lot of Dominicans, Black Dominicans in New York in particular, especially those that are of lighter skin that may not be racialized as Black off the bat, we've had to process our Blackness in a different way, because not only are we not like presenting as Black, and we can unpack that, like what does that mean, you know, because you have Blackness, African Americans, Black Americans also come in all shades. But then as Dominicans in particular, we're unpacking that Blackness in the context of families that are self-hating Black people. So that's very intense. So for me, in the research that I've done, I feel that, you know, it's almost like an act of resistance of sorts for Dominicans of all shades, but to identify as Black and embrace a Black experience in the US.
I would like to say something. So I'm just listening to everything that everyone's saying. So I identify as Black American, more specifically African American. But I currently work in a school that's 85% Latino, and within that Latino population, the majority are Dominicans. And I'm just speaking off of personal experiences. I know, like, I have Dominican friends and have spoken to, and this is just not about Dominicans, but I'm just speaking about Dominicans because of my personal experience. I often wondered, you know, when I heard Dominicans say, I'm not Black, I'm Dominican, was it that they were denying their Blackness, or were they just trying to distinguish themselves from African American, more specifically Dominicans living here in the United States? And me being a Black male that works in a school that's predominantly Latino, I've experienced the colorism as well. You know, there was a student who's Dominican, light Dominican, like really like white almost. And he called me Haitiano once, which is Haitian in Spanish. So that right there just kind of like made me realize that like there is this colorism that takes place within all cultures. And me being an educator, I'm often reflecting on what can I do to effectively teach my students about race, racism, and colorism. you know, being that I was, you know, I guess, quote unquote, a victim of that colorism with my own students who called me Haitiano.
If I can just jump in, and sorry, I don't want to monopolize the conversation and take over, but I did want to share my perspective on that because I've, like I said, like I've been called that as well. I think that the race issue in the Dominican Republic is tied directly to nationalism. The Dominican identity was defined by this mixed heritage. It is from the moment you go to kindergarten, you are taught that you are equally Spanish, that you're equally Indian or Taino, and that you're equally Black. And therefore, all of the Blackness, all of the Taino-ness, and all of the European-ness is kind of diluted. And anything that is of African connection to Africa because of race relations around the world is suppressed. There are parts of the Dominican Republic where people are real African, like they have inherited a lot of the traditions, the religions, the expression of the African ancestors. And as a Catholic country, people reject that completely and sometimes associate that with people from Haitian descent who also are more likely to embrace that side of their heritage. And so that's where the conflict begins. How do you take back, how do you erase, I would say a century of or more of being taught that you are this mix, that you're this new race almost, like I don't think anybody calls it that, but I see it as like this new race of mixed people that is tightly connected to your identity as a Dominican. And when somebody calls you Black, sometimes is what I could perceive people being affected is this idea of, yo, you're taking away my Dominicanness by calling me Black. You're making me a part of a culture or an ethnicity, because people hear Black and they think African American and they don't connect the racial part of it. They're feeling like you're taking away their nationality and grouping them into a culture that they're not a part of, nor do they connect with or identify with. So that's one part. And then where the nationalism part of it comes, there's a lot of conflict between Haitians and Dominicans, given a very complicated history of one country oppressing another, the other country retaliating and oppressing them back, and then you just have this constant conflict. So I think that in terms of easing that conflict and educating your students, it has to come from educating them on the history and re-educating. And I think as Latinos and as Dominicans, and I was thinking about this whole week, we have, those of us who are woke enough to understand that and have a responsibility to educate all of our other fellow Dominicans, but not do it in a way that's accusatory. I think it has to be from a place of healing and from a place of enlightening other people on how we all connect to this culture.
Can I just add to that? I'm sorry, just before I forget. I have a former student who is Dominican, and he's now graduating, about to go to college, but he just spoke to me about this whole, you know, issue of race and everything. And he said that he actually had to sit down and have this conversation with his parents and his family members that didn't feel, that didn't embrace necessarily their Blackness. And he had to just sit down and explain to them, you know, not in, like you said, not in an accusatory way, but just like, you know, trying to get them to understand, like, hey, this is in our DNA, this is our ancestry. So we shouldn't be like denying this or not accepting it or acknowledging it.
Like, there's no racial slur for Dominicans in English. There's no racial slur for any Hispanic or Latin presenting or Latino or any of that in the English language, except for what racist whites would call, I'm going to use the term because it's here, is wetback. But nobody actually uses that as a part of common vernacular. But there are tons of derogatory words within the Spanish language to refer to Black-skinned people. And so I think that that's often a challenge, and I'm sorry, but, you know, I think that's often a challenge when trying as living in the body of Blackness, like living, presenting the way I am. It's often difficult to connect with somebody that identifies as Black, but when you look at their skin, you can see that they are granted privileges above you simply because of the hue of your skin. And that's true even as an African American. If you were a descendant of the American slaves, if you are fairer skin, you are treated differently. Rashida Jones is Black, but doesn't get treated the same way I would or Alana would because she doesn't look Black. And that's why I think I was saying, and I think our sister Nadia put it so well, is that it's such a complex space when, you want to say like a proximity to culture, a proximity to Blackness is not being Black. I really feel, and I would love to hear different point of views, that in America, living in Black skin is a very, very specific thing. Being pulled over by the police and being Black is not the same thing. Vanessa and I have a very different experience being pulled over by the police. Her husband has very different experiences being pulled over the police than my father might, who is substantially lighter than he is. So I think that that's an interesting space to discuss, like even when we're talking about skin colors, like it's just in America, Blackness and living in Black skin and having other people identify you as Black is such a specific thing that it's hard to understand when someone doesn't look like you. It's not that you're rejecting the idea that they own their Blackness. It's just a recognition that, sis, I see you. And I love that you recognize yourself as your African roots and your African descendancy. But I don't know that descendancy is a word. I'm gonna get back to that. But it's still, we still live very different experiences based solely on how we look.
I just want to have a question. I'm trying to figure out, because I grew up in Long Island. I grew up in a community that was very much Hispanic and Latino. More so that when I went off to college, I could look at somebody and identify what country they were from, what Spanish country or Spanish speaking country they were from. It only seems to me that this comes up when we deal with populations that are a hybrid of minority groups. But if we saw a Black person who was biracial, we would automatically assume that they were Black. We would christen them Black. But when you see people who are of Latino descent, it becomes an issue of who's Black, who's this, who's that. When you see people who are in Jamaica and other West Indian islands, we call them Coolie. But when they come to the US, they identify as they might be Indian, they might be something else. I just want to get to the crux of where does this issue arise? Because when it's a Black race mixed with a white race, we're already like, they're Black, we're claiming them. Come to the picnic, come to the barbecue, come to whatever. But there's something specific, like you want a hierarchy with the minority group, to extract the Blackness because that's the least liked. And I don't know how we undo that.
I do want to speak on that because as a person who grew up Haitian American, but also have my father is from India, having a mixed complexion, I think added to that. So like technically by that definition of like the term coolie, that applies to me. And so growing up, I was often mistaken as Dominican. Like the first question was, what are you? Are you Dominican? Are you Puerto Rican? And I think that had to do with a combination of both skin, but then also hair texture. And I think with that also starts to build a hierarchy of like how Black you are. I think growing up, African American was not a term that I was familiar with identifying myself. Like I saw myself as Caribbean American, Haitian American. It wasn't until college, until I got to know, oh, African American is a whole completely different lived experience in terms of like traditions, music, food. And I got to know that through college. And so in college is where I had the pride of like, I am Black American, I am African American, I am Haitian American, all those labels. But I think what gets complicated is like, we also misuse these labels too. So very often Latino and Hispanic are used interchangeably. And it wasn't until recently discovering, okay, Latino is geographically, so Haitians should fall in the category of Latinos. However, we never place Haitians in that category. And I personally think it has to do with because Haitians and the association of Blackness with Haitians that we don't do that, versus Brazilians, just because there is like a mix of skin tones that we're used to seeing with Brazilians, we're all of a sudden willing to bring in Brazilians into the category of Latinos, but Brazil and Haiti are in the same situation of not speaking the Spanish language, but still being located in Latin America. Right. And now for me, I work in a predominantly Latinx school. Before I was working in a predominantly West Indian school. And so Maurice, so what you talk about of like I am Dominican, but I'm not Black. I've definitely had students of like, why is there so much tension between DR and Haiti? And I think until we unpack this anti-Blackness specifically, we're not going to get to the root of the issues.
The funny thing is, I have never had a white person ask me, what am I? I have always had people of color.
Yes.
And I think if you look at me, you're like, I'm Black. I have had people ask my parents in my presence, what am I? Because I'm too this to be Black, or I look to this to be Black. It's an issue among us that white people don't even business with.
I think that being a Black woman, growing up in New York City, specifically in Brooklyn, I think that has a lot to do with just history and slavery. Everybody wants to be someone other than Black American. So the other day I was asked by a friend, how do you identify Black American or African American? And I said to that person, I'm Black American. That's my experience. Like, I can trace my history back. I know my history, but as far as my lived experience here in New York City with my grandparents, I happen to grow up with my great-grandparents. I'm a Black American woman, but I could sympathize with you, Elena, because someone always wants me to be from somewhere else, because being Black is always seen as not good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think of the term just Black, like in college when people, I think in New York City, because everyone comes from so many different cultures, it's always like, okay, what are you? But there's always an assumption of like identified to a different country outside of the United States. So then when someone says they're rooted in the United States, you often hear the term, oh, you're just Black.
Mm-hmm.
And that's problematic.
Yeah,
I'll
say that.
I've had African American friends be offended. Like if someone asks me, "What are you?" I ask, "What are you asking? Are you asking if I'm a New Yorker? Are you asking if I'm originally from the Bronx?"
That's exactly what I say.
Well,
because I don't understand the question.
When somebody would ask me, "Where are you from?" I've traveled to Africa quite a few times, and there are a lot of conversations in that in itself. But I remember having a lot of conversations in college with lighter skinned Black Americans or African Americans. I tell people, I'll call you whatever you want to be called. So I don't, at this point, call people what they want to be called. But, there was always this question of why I identified with Africanness. And I said, well, if somebody asks you 4 times a week what country in Africa you're from, at some point you're going to start to embrace like, oh, okay, I never thought it was like a bad thing to be, connected to Africa. And I also understand how when people look at me, that's what I look like. And so it keeps coming back to like, what is your experience when people see you? I love when other people identify with their Blackness, because I believe the more of us that identify with it, the more solidarity we have, the stronger we are in numbers. But we are definitely having different experiences. And people keep referring to a lot of what happens in schools. And so I just want to throw this out here because I know this is also part of the conversation. In schools, I also teach in a lot of schools. The way that people are treated, I could say it comes down to culture, but it also is colorism. 2 people can be having the same conversation, but if one person is loud, they're seen as angry and aggressive. And if the other person is loud, they're seen more as cute and spicy. And so that was a lot of the situations that I had growing up, because I wasn't able to use my voice the way that I wanted to because I was afraid of how I was being portrayed in those spaces. And so I think that's also something that we need to talk about in the conversation of culture, of what it's like. And I don't even know if it's a colorism thing or if it's a Latin versus Black thing, but it's definitely something that does cause tension in the communities when 2 people can do the same thing and be seen differently.
So I wanted to jump in earlier, but so many voices. But to piggyback, I have a bunch of piggyback, but Kristen, to your piggyback. So I worked at a Black media company for a long time. So I can tell you that the media, not specifically Black media, but as a Dominican working in a Black media company, when I was loud, I was sassy. When I was loud, I was, to your point, I was spicy. I was like, it was almost like it was cute to some of my Black colleagues, right? I worked with Black colleagues from all over the US, and it was always such an annoying experience because having come from I worked at Rothschild before I worked at Interactive One. So I went from working for a very, very white corporate space where I was exotic. Whenever I left my hair, at the time I had a big, big, big mane. I was exotic every time they saw my hair natural. And then I worked for a Black company. So when I was, open, and when I was like very grounded in my thoughts and in my ideas, I was spicy. So for myself as an Afro-Dominican, I've spent a lot of time studying how people see me, and those little microaggressions that come with being an outspoken Dominican woman. And it still confuses me. But to your point, yes, when a Black woman is strong and open and demanding and vocal, she's angry. And when Latina does it, she's spicy. And Latino media plays into that narrative, right? When Univision plays into that, Telemundo plays into that, Latina magazine, and the list goes on. They like that narrative for some reason. And I'm not spicy, I'm strong. That's how at least I see myself. My last name is Leon, so that's a legacy within itself. Also, I had some things to say about the Blackness within the Dominican community. I went to elementary school in the Upper West Side. So I went to school with more Puerto Ricans than Dominicans. Out of also my elementary school teachers and junior high school teachers were all Puerto Rican. So Afro-Latino culture was introduced to me, at least the culture part. Religion and voodoo, that's a different conversation, because I grew up with the synchronicity of both. I grew up going to Catholic Bible classes on Sundays, but then also my grandmother had an altar where she would pray to Christian saints, Catholic saints, but also the African, Liwas. But outside from me knowing that there was some type of African saints that she was praying to, I didn't know anything else about the culture, right? She wasn't playing the music really, but Puerto Ricans introduced me to bomba. Puerto Ricans is why I even became a percussionist as a kid. So the Puerto Ricans that I went to school with and my professors, while they were all light-skinned Puerto Ricans, one of my teachers was married to, Jose from the Plenos de la 21. So I saw these really, really proud, Puerto Ricans that were, proud to be jibaros, proud to be percussionists, proud to carry their culture in New York City. But my own community didn't have that experience. So when I learned how to dance bomba, I started to get curious as to what other sounds was similar. And then my family became open, introducing me to follow music. And the rest was history with me doing my own research. But, since a kid, my family didn't celebrate the Black parts of Dominican culture. It wasn't because of Puerto Ricans, I became curious and my hunger just grew to reconnect with that root. And once I started playing the drum, my heart just opened up. So that's like my little 2 cents.
Thank you for bringing up that topic. I know that there are a lot of Latinos who benefit from the systems of white supremacy, especially the lighter skinned ones. And they refuse to acknowledge it. That's one of them. And they are not helping in dismantling those systems that are still oppressing the people of darker color. Now, have any of you experienced something like that? Do we have any lighter skinned Latinos that can share some light on that topic?
Girl, you. You.
Okay. So I guess I will speak. Coming to this country, I struggle more with the language barrier than with the skin color barrier. Like I never lost a job, or if I got stopped by the police, they let me go. But it was more the language barrier, being able to communicate with people and learning English properly. I came here at 17 years old. was in high school, then went to college. And I didn't have any African American or Black American friends in my entire college time. Yes, because as soon as I didn't speak English well, I went to college right away. And I tried to stay with the Latinos because at least they will understand me when I spoke. And then I joined a sorority, a Latino sorority, and I tried to hang out with those friends. And it wasn't until I graduated from grad school and I started teaching in high school that I started meeting people of Black Americans, pretty much. I started traveling the world and I joined groups. I didn't find any groups for Latinos for me to join. So I joined, I'm like, I'm not gonna join the Caucasian groups because I can't relate to them. So I joined the groups that were for Black Americans, and that's most of my friends right now are Black Americans and are from those groups that I joined. And that's how I met my husband too. American Jaramaji, that's right here. So
I think the Super Bowl was an interesting time to look at this disconnect because I saw so many people, so many culture wars over J-Lo and Shakira's performance, right? So for the white people, they just think it's too sexy, it's too much gyrating, it's all of that. And so Black people are like, shut the fuck up, that was awesome, that's culture, shut up. But then I saw things that were really problematic. I saw women that I considered to be Hispanic or Latina saying things like, yes, Shakira and J-Lo, show these Black girls, Beyonce what? And I'm like, whoa, sis, that is not a comparison. Like, one, it's a performance, right? So if you genuinely think that Shakira and J-Lo's performance was better, leave it at that. Like, where does the whole Beyonce what? We do it better. Like, that is an added layer on top of it where I'm like, you know, and then I feel like if that is presented to you, then you're forced to be like, well, see, this is where the Black thing comes in. Like, why are you making this about two Latina women compared to a Black woman? You didn't compare them to Madonna's performance, to Katy Perry's performance, who all had great Super Bowl performances. The default was these two were better than Beyonce, who's obviously Black. So I wonder, and I mean, this debate over J-Lo, you and I have had heated discussions over J-Lo's Blackness. And I just think, for me, J-Lo has never asked to be Black. She's never, I think she has African descendancy if you look in her blood, but I don't think she's ever asked to be identified as Black, so I don't identify her that way. I think that she's talked about growing up and listening to Black music, and I think that proximity to Black culture is awesome, but I don't think that she needs to identify herself as Black if she doesn't live that experience and she doesn't feel it. So I'm wondering, you know, for the women that identify as Latina and Hispanic, and for Griselda, who is identifying as Black but doesn't necessarily present that way, like how do we unpack that? Because it was really jarring to me that the first parallel that was drawn, that was Shakira and J-Lo showed Beyonce how to perform.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting here, and I'm gonna be honest, I'm sitting here just taking deep breaths because this is a narrative that I've been unpacking for a really long time. Like, on one end, and I'm gonna be very like specific to Dominicans, when Dominicans don't identify as Black, then we're being called out like, oh, but yes, and I'm speaking specifically with darker skinned Dominicans, right? But even like those that are of my complexion or lighter, it's like, y'all self-hating, you know, you're counterproductive, you're holding the movement back because we benefit from the civil rights movement, and I absolutely acknowledge that. And I always am clear as a Black woman, as a Black Latina woman, that my family, my Black mother has benefited from the struggles of Black American, African Americans. I'm very clear on that. But then on one end, when Dominicans don't identify as Black because there's a deep legacy of internalized hate and a 31-year dictatorship where Blackness was criminalized and violence was used to suppress Blackness in every way, then rightfully so, because I'm one of the first ones, we're called out on like, oh, but you know, y'all Black. But then when we identify as Black, then there's a problem, you know. And I'm just like, we need to get over, and I'm not saying like that I'm very clear on that. I have lighter skin privilege. I'm very clear on the fact that I choose to be Black, that if like my mother doesn't open her mouth and she gets on the MTA, people are not going to be like, oh, ella dominicana. They're going to be like, she's a Black woman from the US. But I think that we have to become more aware of the legacies of white supremacy that have us doing this, nitpicking on colorist attitudes to say who's Black and who's not. I've coined a term, it's called the Black Ohmmeter. And my body responds viscerally when I feel like I'm in the presence of the Black Ohmmeter. Who's Blacker than Black? And I'm not here to justify like lighter skinned Latinos benefit off of the struggles of Black people in the US, but then not wanting to claim Blackness. But that's not what the majority of people in this conversation are doing. We're here because we are proud to be Black. We're here because we're advocates of a larger Black struggle. And we're here because our people are dying. Because when I see George Floyd being murdered in front of my eyes, he is a Black man and he is my brother. I don't say, oh no, you know, I can't relate to him because I'm Dominican and I'm a lighter skinned Black woman. So no, that's not how I identify, you know. So I feel like, you know, I'm coming from a long few days of just having this conversation, but longer than that, it's been over 20 years where I feel like lighter skinned Latinas that are choosing to reclaim, rightfully so, our African Black identities, constantly having to, you know, not constantly, but sometimes being faced with like this questioning of like, we don't have a right to. And I don't know who said it. I want to make sure, Kristen, thank you, where you were like, call people what they want to be called, you know? Especially when people are identifying like with me in a very grounded way, when I've done extensive research and where my lived experience, I may not be a darker skinned Black woman, but when I'm in a predominantly white institution like Binghamton University or Syracuse University like Ghislaine and I were, or Binghamton like Vanessa and I were, when I walked into a room with my big hair and my body shape and the accent in my voice, nobody was saying, oh, she's Dominican, we're gonna be kinder to her, you know? So I'm here because I feel like we need to, as a people, it don't matter if you African American, Black American, African, Black, Creole, Dominican, like as a people, we need to try our very best to get over these nuanced differences and acknowledge that there are self-hating Black Dominicans that fuck it up for the rest of us, but to acknowledge that there are Black Dominicans that love who we are, that love being Black, and that are all about Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely. Hallelujah.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a piece of that. I mean, one of the things that I think critically about is this idea of perception, and even at work, right? It's I might have a reality, and I do have a reality, but if 9 people at work perceive me to be something or be a certain way, then ultimately the perceptions are going to rule out, and that's often what I feel like I'm battling, not my own reality, but perceptions. And I just want to resurface something that Mahogany said that I found to be so profound, which is that in growing up, there was Black or white. And whether we identify between the difference of, okay, well, I'm not white, so I'm Black, the absence of whiteness, the fact of the matter is, if we believe that, then white people believe that. And it's the white people who believe that I know what a white person looks like, and therefore anyone who's not my complexion is then Black. And therefore, it is very binary in their mind. However we decide we want to, you know, chop up the second half of this equation, it's very binary in their minds. And it's not more evident than what we're seeing now with everyone, quote unquote, sheltered in place, looking at what the cops are out there doing. I mean, one after the other, it just doesn't matter. It's like, if you're not a white person who's experienced this level of power, who feels like you can do anything, which is an innate feeling and belief, right? Even with the cameras on, they're still doing it. It's not even like something they know how to shut off when the camera's shining on them. And Lord knows, you know, I grew up using the N-word every other word, but when I got around white people, for whatever reason, I know how to shut it off. Or when I got around my elders, I know how to shut it off. They don't even know how to shut it off, even with the cameras on them. And so that's my question. It's not so much how we want, yes, definitely call someone what they want to be called, but understand that white people perceive you to be one way, even if you have your own belief about yourself, and be aware of that and what that means. And that needs to be what really sort of pulls us together.
I think it all stems back to the concept of community and acceptance and home. And sadly, communities are built based on how you look. I'm a darker skinned person, and so even from the day I arrived in the United States, I felt embraced by Black people in the U.S. Like they automatically just gravitated towards me. They're like, "Oh, you're one of us." And at that time, I didn't know a lick of English. So I will be just like, "Yes," like I didn't know what was going on. And so they will know that I wasn't, African Americans, and then just like left me alone. So I think it's how you look really matters in terms of who connects with you and who doesn't. And in terms of building a community, we have to get past our looks and really connect with our shared experience of being in the US. And that's something that's unfortunately is very hard to do. And it just starts here, starts with connecting people from different backgrounds, like we're doing right now.
I also wanted to add that I grew up in Detroit, and Detroit is very black and white. There are some Middle Eastern people there, but for the most part, there were not a lot of Latinos living there when I grew up. It may have changed now because I've been gone for like 20 years, but for me, like when I went to New York for the first time, that was the first time that I'd had someone mistake me for something other than Black American. Like it was completely foreign to me. I didn't really even know what to expect because people would just speak to me in Spanish. And I'm like, I don't speak Spanish. Like, what's going on here? So there's definitely a regionalism effect, that happens even in the US in terms of how people perceive you. I think we have some people from the West Coast, and I don't know how their perceptions are of folks in general, but I think it's very different than the perception of people on the East Coast. And of course, it's different from the perception of people in the South and in the Midwest. I've lived in, Texas, Georgia, Indiana, Ohio, and literally New York was the only place that someone ever mistook me for something other than Black American. So there's definitely kind of a regionalism effect, I think, that happens as well that we also want to keep in mind.
So I just want to, whoever the person is from Los Angeles, I'm curious about that too, because one of the things that I noticed teaching in the school system is there's certain areas, hey Sylvia, there's certain areas that are Puerto Rican, Dominican, but then there's certain areas that are heavily Mexican and South Americans, and they are very different culturally. And, whenever I would speak to my people in LA and, oh, these Mexican this and Mexican that, like, I don't like that. Don't talk about people of color. But they're having a very different experience there than I am with the people here. My experience with people from South America, Central America, is they are always the ones coming to my parent workshops. They are always the ones who are on time. They bring their children with them. They show up to everything. So I've had a different experience with them than I've had with Black Americans, Dominicans, and Puerto Ricans. And so I'm always curious, depending geographically where you are, on what people are experiencing with people who are considered part of Latin culture.
So I was raised in Harlem. My first job was on 125th. 14-year-old Paramount Decorators, which no longer exists. For those who don't know, Paramount Decorators was the Bed Bath & Beyond of Harlem. So I worked with all, the predominantly Black staff, and that Black staff for the most part was West Indian, right? Jamaicans, Trinis, where I want to say there was a couple of people from Dominica, and prior to, and even in high school, I went to Murray Bertram. So I went to high school with a lot of kids from Brooklyn. They were also from, Bed-Stuy, East New York, Flatbush, a lot of Caribbean Black. The couple of Black kids that were fair-skinned like me, right, were the Black and Puerto Rican kids. It wasn't until I went away to college, where I went to Syracuse, where I met Black kids from California who were like my color. And I was like, wait, you're Black? That was the first time that I even knew that African American people came in multiple shades. I just thought that the Caribbeans came from multiple shades. because I was raised in Harlem. Like I had a real Black experience. So, you know, one thing that I like about Europe is that in Europe, they have this Erasmus, you know, program for undergrad where you can travel within the European Union and get to know the cultures, right? And I think in the US, you know, if you don't travel, you don't really have a full spectrum of what we are as people. When I went to Indianapolis, people asked me if I was a biracial woman. They didn't know Dominicans. When I went to Dallas, same experience. When I went to Detroit for the first time, same experience. In Detroit, there was just Mexicans. Like I was like Dominican. They also didn't know what Dominicans were. I've had people tell me, can you show me a map of where Dominican Republic is? Because there are some people who just have no clue, right? And that's all dependent on where in the US you live. So for me, traveling, going away to college with, you know, diverse African-American people really broadened my perspective, but also traveling within the US also gave me another perspective to understand how other people of color, you know, view me. So I think a proposed solution is more inter-US travel to explore communities of color outside of where you're from.
So I wanted to go back to the point you made, Kristen, because I wonder how does that impact like allyship? So I say this because I teach in a high school in Bushwick, and a lot of our students from the Latinx community are Central American. Like they come from Ecuador, they come from Mexico. And so there's two instances I think of with students I had recently, which I think can impact, okay, how are they receiving the Black Lives Matter movement? Like one student who's Ecuadorian, he's like, well, this doesn't affect me directly. So we had to have a whole long conversation of like, why is that not the case and what you can do as a Latinx student. Another student, he's like born in Mexico. So he was like, so where was all this energy for Black Lives Matter movement when Trump was basically bashing Mexicans about immigration and no one came through? So I think that's like an important thing to also consider, because I think there's like, you know, I think it looks very different from like Puerto Rican, Dominican, Cuban, where you have more link to the African roots versus from some of the Central American countries where they may identify more with their indigenous roots.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that point, because I actually remember Cinco de Mayo happening. And I had to sit down. I was teaching an entrepreneurship program with young kids, like older elementary age kids. And I asked them, do you guys even know what it is? And we sat down, we watched the video, and then we talked about it. And I sat down with those kids and I said, you guys are Mexican. There was one child who I think was Ecuadorian. And, you know, I'm a little militant. That's why I go in independently and teach my stuff. And I was like, if people like your food, but they don't like you, don't deal with them. Anybody who's celebrating this weekend, but asking for you to leave the country, those are not your people. And so, you know, I do get a little irritated when I see those conversations around immigration. And I will say, I think one of the issues with Black and Latin people is I do see a lot of Black people jump on to helping everybody all the time. You know, we're all up in immigration and that's wrong. And, you know, every now and then you'll see somebody trickle in with a comment and they usually get jumped on. Very rarely do I see someone Black jump in and start that whole conversation of, well, what about us? They're taking our jobs. Every other Black person will pounce on them. So that's been my experience in my circles. It could be different outside of my circles. But when the Black Lives Matter situations come up, then we're usually sitting around going, okay, guys, we were there for the LGBTQ movement and we were there for the Latin movement and we were there, where y'all at? You know, now I think it's very different now. I mean, even lovely companies are jumping in and they believe in Black Lives Matter too. So that's another conversation. Everybody seems to be rolling with it right now. But in the past, it often felt like we were very alone in our fight.
Well, I think that the black community, and this is something that I admire, it comes from the history of being very outspoken. And there's also a sense of fear with Latinos. Like I face it from my own family. They're like, at one point I was very outspoken when Trump won the election. I was so angry and I was posting in social media, and then my family was like, Mija, like, you know, Trump may get mad and kick us all out of the country, so quiet down a little bit, you know. So there's also that fear of, let me, you know, I'm lucky to be in this country, let me not ruffle any feathers and just put my head down and focus on advancing my family and my future. So I think it comes a little bit from that. Also, we come from countries where when you've been outspoken, you've been killed, like right away. My dad grew up during the Trujillo era, and anybody that was educated, anybody that was outspoken and marching and protesting was killed. I mean, people had to flee the country just for that fact. So there's also that element of, let me just fight the fights that are closer to home and not really associate myself with any other fights because I have a lot to lose.
I wanted to jump in on the West Coast perspective here a little bit, because as we are educating ourselves through this dialogue, I mean, I see a lot of responsibility through Hollywood, through social media, through, if you are in some sort of position to be able to expose the diversity within a community, then jump on it. The same way that we're asking companies to have different people on their boards. You know, if you are representing Latino-ness, and I'm born and raised West Coast, like it was all Mexico all the time. To this day, people are like, what part of Mexico are you from? LA. Like my cultural background at home, I was not Mexican. And we clearly defined ourselves by not being Mexican. And that creates a separation. So we're already interfighting with the Latinos. Well, just going to add another, culture to the mix, which is, you know what I mean? And the way that people talk about each other. I mean, if we're not seeing it represented, if we're not teaching our children, like it's great growing up and seeing a lot of the love for the indigenous community. You have a lot of raza and danza azteca, going on in schools and programs. But so if we expand something like that, and you're going to have a Latino something or other, like, so are we going to have the bomba? Are we going to have the Azteca? Are we going to have folklorico? Are we going to have, and really be representative, right? If that includes Spain, include Spain. Like, fine, that's fine. But make that known, for me, I get so bummed that I don't see Gina Torres in Latina roles. I think she has powerful roles. I don't see Laz Alonso in powerful Latino roles, right? The same way with like white Jewish Latinos. They're white and Jewish on camera, but they're not coming across as Latinos on stage or in movies, or it's changed absolutely since I was a little girl. But we need to continue having these voices represented so that we can come together. We can say we are all a part of this. And what does it mean to then, bring everyone else together?
And I think it comes back to us fighting two struggles. We're fighting the home struggle. Just because we're Latinos doesn't mean that there's no race relations and issues in our own countries. And we unfortunately didn't have a civil rights movement nor anything that marked the difference between a period of oppression and one where people were really fighting for equality. So we just moved into a comfortable space of racism where things are not as overt. People kind of welcome a lot of the way they speak and the way to refer to certain races. And there's still that need to elevate white as a race and put everyone else down, whether you're indigenous or you're Black or anything else. So until we heal, I think it has to be a dual process of healing ourselves in our countries and then healing the people who are here, and how do we come together as minorities or people of color, because we're moving away from that minority, right? There's a lot of power in our numbers. And utilizing that power that we have as a huge community of color to fight for our equality and for the rights that we deserve.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do we heal from this? How do we heal from those feelings, from whatever we bring from back home and whatever we deal with our families, to be able to now be present and support in this situation? Because we talked about all of our differences, but what are our similarities and how can we actually come together? How do we heal?
Could I jump in? I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Earl Spate. I am from North Carolina. I finished high school in 1985, and so I had quite a bit different of an experience than most people because I came from an environment that was either black or white. And so it didn't matter where you had come from. If you weren't white, you had to be pretty much classified as being black. The central thing that I've heard throughout this wonderful and esteemed panel here is education. And I am a student of the late great Malcolm X. And Malcolm X talked about being educated by your enemy. And that might be a little bit militant for some of us when I say enemy, but let's think about it. We've come to a system that has taught each of us, all of us, to have some form of hatred for ourselves and other people who may even look like us. So if we want to talk about healing, I think the healing has to begin at us making a decision to dismantle some of the systems that we are a part of here. I'm not concerned about TV and Hollywood, not to insult anyone. I don't give a damn about television and actors in Hollywood or any of that. What I'm concerned about is our Black and Latino children that I see up and down these streets with uncombed hair and shoes too big and raggedy clothes. And I think that we have a system here that we eat our own here. And if we want to heal our communities, I think we need to look inward and begin to come together and go against the systems that are oppressing us all. And I'm down for that fight, and I hope you all are too. Thank you.
Well, I'm right behind you on how to heal our community, but I will say that I'm always careful because I do work in these spaces about finger wagging at communities that have throughout history not been paid attention to. They don't feel like anything. They don't, you know, when you're talking about people who have been in poverty for generations, yes. Having a conversation with them about what they're wearing and how they look is unproductive. Now, what I will say is going back to community connection, as somebody who is an educator, I have a vendor number, I go into schools, I teach programs, and what I often see is people who are not from the community coming into the community to teach. And to your point, Earl, if the colonizer is writing the history books, then we all gonna have some kind of view of ourselves, right? And so for me, one of the ways I know the school can make a difference, so anybody on here who's an educator who has a business, get your vendor numbers. I think schools should have to hire at least 50% of their vendors from the community. They outsource, they bring people in from West Bubba, whoever, they jack up prices so that a lot of this money that people are saying, oh, well, the kids have all this money in the public schools. Do they really? You throw money at them, but how is the money being allocated? So for me, the school is where it's going to start. That's how you take out poverty, right? Education, paying attention to these kids and not making them feel like they're nothing, not judging them because of what they come from, because they haven't had access to anything more or anything better, right? So imagine if those of you who have businesses were able to go into these schools and teach after school programs, or go on a random day and teach the kids about whatever it is that your craft or your business is. That's a way that we can start healing the community. That's tangible. And when we start actually voting for these different laws and for these different, statutes or whatever, it should be written that people have to come from the community to teach the kids. Because clearly having people outside of the community come in and teach them is continuing this whole cycle of self-hate. And it's not helpful. That's not healing us. So that's one of my awesome.
Can I piggyback on that? If anyone was insulted by what I said, I had no intention of insulting anyone. I am a person who believes that we should take good care of our children. And so when I see incidences of children who do not look like they're well taken care of, I become very concerned. And so that was my position on that.
I concur with what you said, and also I want to piggyback what Kristen said. It's also not just educating our children, because I am a teacher and I purposefully do things in class about culture, and I teach history, so I know it was a great dynamic for me, a tool for me to use. But we also have to teach the families. We have to go back to community and bring in the mothers and the fathers and the aunts and the grandmothers, because that's where the kids get their thinking from. So they'll go home to one conversation and then come to you with another conversation, and they end up confused. So a part of educating the community with the kids is also educating and bringing in our elders so they can have an understanding of the systemic racism going on, so to speak.
I think also to add on to the education piece is also educating the educators, because to be realistic, right, we are going to have a lot of people who are not a person of color or Black teaching our kids, because until we get the seat at the table in order to make those decisions, which is why it was crucially important for me to become an assistant principal, to be part of making decisions and bring other people. You're gonna have a lot of staff members working for our kids who are either ignorant of like what racist ideologies they may be passing on. And so until we can flip it, where is the majority of us teaching our kids, we have to educate our staff members and provide them with professional development in terms of them being able to start to realize like all the issues that they have internalized themselves around racism and the savior complex and coming to help save our kids.
And I mean, I think—
Can I shamelessly plug my brother's book for all the educators? For white folks to teach in the hood and the rest of y'all too, by Dr. Christopher M.
Yes. Yes.
Just a brilliant roadmap on reality pedagogy and all those things to use in these spaces. In the food and wine space, I have spent, well, first of all, last Sunday, I spent 41 minutes dragging white women, and for some reason the video went viral. It's weird. I'll put it in the comments. But I think it's very important to challenge these white savior complexes, these ideas that our communities and our children cannot do better if we don't have white dollars, white people. It's bullshit. And it is indoctrinating our kids with this idea that whiteness is excellence. So I just wanted to jump in for a moment to salute all the educators here, that our children seeing Black people, and I mean our children all the way up to graduate school. Because for me, I had all West Indian schools, all West Indian teachers till the 8th grade, 4 years of high school that would have totally fucked me up if I was subjected to the whiteness that I had to deal with. And then I went to NYU, where I never had a Black professor throughout undergrad or grad school. So I want to salute the educators. I'll put the books in the comments, but it is so, oh, somebody already did it. Thank you, Brett. But it's so important, and I so honor and salute and see all of you, because all the bullshit of color, like when our kids see you, whether you are Black, Latino, or whatever, they see some of themselves in them. And I think that that's so critical to them owning their identity and fighting this fight when we're all gone.
I wanted to, I just wanted to speak on that in terms of personal experience, because I ended up teaching literally from the exact community I came from. So in terms of like the relatability, like at first students were like, Miss, like, why are you here? Shouldn't you be teaching at Brooklyn Tech? Which again, that's a whole nother thing to unpack of like why our kids think they don't deserve good educators to begin with, because it's just like years of the system has set it up that way. But I think we were able to have honest conversations in terms of race. And I agree with you, because I think growing up, I basically had all white teachers throughout. And then whatever Black teachers I did have weren't in the core content areas. They were in the arts, they were in music, they were in PE. So also, what message does that send of like, our people are not important enough to teach what is deemed the critical subjects, even though all these subjects are just as essential as math, ELA, and social studies, and then having to wait until college to have one Black professor and it being an arts professor. And so what message does that send of like, we don't deserve to be in those spaces? So the more they see us and see like, oh, we came from the community, if you're able to make it, then we can make it too, is extremely powerful.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in really quickly. I'm gonna drop the link over in the chat section, but the company that I'm currently doing a project with right now that I'm working with is Girls Leadership, and we're doing trainings called Power Collaboratives, and it's exactly what you were talking about, Princess. So you are correct. we're gonna have people who are outside of the community coming to teach. It's just inevitable. But it's a program we're doing right now on trauma and culturally responsive teaching. And it asks a lot of those questions about how we're showing up to our kids. There's an article called Why Children Are Not Bringing Social Emotional Learning Home. And it's exactly what somebody else said. I don't remember who it was, but if you're teaching one thing in school and then the parents are doing something different at home, you know, while you are trying to teach them tools to be able to navigate through this American place we're in some ways it could be telling these kids like what you learned is not right. And so it's creating this tension within themselves where they're learning one thing in school, they're learning one thing at home, you're being told to be independent, it's all about you, you're going home, it's all about the collective. And so I encourage anybody who is interested in getting that kind of training, who has a colleague who might need to go get some of that type of training, I'm gonna put the link over in the chat because that's definitely what our kids need. No matter who's in front of them, they need to be aware of themselves when they come into the room and what they're bringing in, what kind of baggage they're bringing into these kids.
I just wanted to mention something that a colleague, because my staff and I, we have been having these discussions like this entire week, and I've been talking to a few colleagues about this very topic here, and I just wanted to mention something that she had mentioned to me about, because we're talking about education, and she was just saying to me, you know, why is it that our history, whether it's African American history, Latin American history, why is that an elective that when you go to that class, the people that are in that class are the people that look like you and me, and maybe a few, you know, white people that are interested in the topic, but why does it have to be a separate class? Why is it not, you know, in mainstream, the mainstream curriculum? So I thought that was like very, very important that she mentioned that, because I mean, it is true. Like, if you want to know more about your history, then you have to take a separate class. And why is it that way?
Absolutely.
I mean,
Moving away
I
from
wanted
Eurocentric world, I'm going to say world, and shifting that. I mean, I remember even people talking about U.S. history, and they want to come talk to me about, you know, Boston or whatever. I said, look, I'm from California. We have a completely different history. Like, we got different issues over here. You know, don't put me in with all these people, right? Like, and when I was in education, I remember ways that educators could dismantle the system. Like, okay, you need me to teach this book? Okay, well, having students come up with what's not in the books. And I completely agree that it is not the responsibility solely on educators. People that are in curriculum, like, what kind of books are you developing? What's the accessibility? I mean, when I taught abroad, I made sure that the entire literature options were from diverse voices. Like, why is it that we can't have more voices in our kids' literacy, right? Who are we representing? You know, I'm gonna stop, I'm gonna get real emotional, but it really does come down to representation, who we're seeing on a daily basis, who we're reading, who we're listening to, and shift that centricism to our own communities.
I just want to quickly add, we also have to think of like who companies are hiring to create that curriculum to begin with.
I also want to encourage you, as I've learned, to all of you, you know, I saw yogi, I saw all types of things there. Like, pour this same representation into your passion. I mean, wine and food are my passion, and it's been incredible how, as a hobby, I've been able to open up that space and continue to open that space to people that look like us. So I just want to encourage you all, I mean, through Black travel, which is how I know a lot of you, you know, through food, through wine, through yoga, through whatever else makes you you. Also, make sure that your light is shining in those spaces too, because our children are looking at that. You know, yoga, especially now for adults, yoga is a form of mental health. You want to see yoga teachers that look like you. Like, sis, I can't do that. I got a big ass and big titties. I'm not bending like that, at least not yet. Help me get to that point. You know what I mean? I want to, as we all pursue our professional goals and open up those spaces, I encourage you all to also find your light in the spaces and the things that make you happy, and make sure you're represented in those spaces as well.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, my sister and I are yoga instructors, and the yoga we teach is Kundalini. And for anybody that knows, yoga is hella white, but Kundalini yoga is whitey white. Like, it's unbelievable how extremely white the practice is. But my sister and I have come in to kind of like radicalize that. And something as simple as Vanessa has joined, Ghislaine is on it now. We have these 40-day practices that are virtual. And we chose, maybe subconsciously but intentionally, to put an image of like a thick, heavier set, like a woman sitting in like a yoga pose, and that attracted so many sisters to the practice because, you know, yoga is a very African thing. For though, you know, it's been fed to us as an Indian thing, a South Asian thing, but Egyptians were doing yoga. You see hieroglyphs on pyramid walls of people doing yoga, and it's time that we continuously reclaim these practices because our folks, everyone needs them, but our folks need them more now than ever. And you know, I'm led to share that I think we're all, as a human being, a species, are being led to learn a new language, and that language is the language of love. And when I was younger, I used to be ashamed of speaking about love in radical spaces or spaces of like nation building, whatever, you know, we're calling this, because this is part of the movement. We're living through a revolution, and this Zoom call, like so many others, are part of the bricks and of the foundation that we're building, is a new language of love. As people of African descent, we've been hardened, and I understand it's centuries of enslavement, exploitation, abuse, and it's intersectional because if you're a woman, our ancestors were sexually assaulted for these economies to be able to exist. Babies were property before they were even birthed. So I think that we're being taught to like soften our hearts, and that's very hard for a people who have been traumatized and who have been led to harden our hearts, rightfully so, to protect ourselves, especially our children. You know, but Jessica, I wanted to just big you up. It's just you asked us about like cancel culture. We're very big on canceling stuff. Lord knows I'm a Leo sun, Aries moon. That means I got a lot of fire in me, and I'm quick to be like, bye, you know. But I'm learning that grace is needed in these times. Like grace to realize that everybody's on their journey. Everybody has a story, and if they're triggering you, then they're triggering something that has to heal within. And when we're triggered and our heart starts beating, that's when we cancel people because we get really scared of the emotions that come up. But that's such a beautiful opportunity to come into a healing space to say, what is it about this person's appearance? What is it about this person's background? What is it about what the person is saying that's triggering something in me? You know, so I think we will do a disservice to our ancestors and to the children that are yet to come if we build new realities and we sit around new tables envisioning a new world, and we have hate and we have the same bitterness that white people and white supremacy teaches us, because all we're going to do is dismantle one house to build another one that's just brown. You know, and that's not what we're looking for. We're not looking for brown supremacy, black supremacy. We need to get rid of all of this. What does that look like? I don't know, but I think that we are living through some like unprecedented times, and I'm really blessed, and I'm really honored to be part of this conversation, because it's like a little grain of sand. That's what we're imparting with conversations that are very honest, like this one.
Hello, I thank God for all of your voices, but I also want to implore everybody to just speak up. I'll give you two examples and recent ones. I used to work for the Miss California Latina pageant. I worked with the girls. There was one girl who got first runner-up. She was a Black Latina, beautiful woman, big hair like me. And they said, come back next year and you might win, but straighten your hair. Not in front of me. We have to dismantle these white supremacist systems and thought processes. And if I hadn't spoken up, she would have come back the next year with her straight hair and lost again. So I just encourage everyone to speak up for these little nuances that would have slipped by anybody else, but not me. I also work for Fox Sports still, and I'm still triggered. The other day, I don't know if you guys watch FS1, but Joy Taylor, beautiful Black woman, is the co-host for the Herd, and Colin Cowherd was out. She could have hosted that show by herself. They brought in a white man, and of course, Drew Brees made his comments, and the white man came in and said it was a minefield, and just diminished her thoughts and overspoke her, and his nose was turned up, and he was just so rude to her, and so many people just let that go. But I couldn't let it go, and we can't let that go, because a lot of people don't understand that as Black women, as Black Latin women, we are very invisible to the white system, to white men in particular. So I spoke up, and he was given some words, and things are changing. That's the only way we're gonna enact change, is if we all use our voices when it's uncomfortable. Now, if I don't have a job, I hope one of y'all hook me up, because it ain't over.
We got you, sis.
So if I reach out to y'all, please hook a sister up. But
I want to piggyback off of
yesterday.
I want to piggyback off of what Mahogany said, because in addition to using our voices, and this is something that I've fallen victim to, we also have to figure out how to use our proverbial pen and paper. I've spent the last 2 or 3 weeks very angry, and as a result of that, started researching Marcus Garvey, because I just wanted to hear a different perspective and sort of recall the things that Marcus Garvey was trying to preach, which you get to that place where you say, man, I just wish I had my own shit. And I would just give me a piece of land, I'll go do my own shit. But then I started segueing over into just doing a lot more research around redlining. And I knew what it was, but I wanted to understand systemically and institutionally what it was. And the thing that I've been ignorant of, and the things that I've fallen victim to, is around voting time, where I might know the presidential candidate, I might even know the mayor candidate, but I don't know any of the people down the line, and I just pick the Democrat, or I pick the name that sounds either Black or Latino. I'm admitting that. And what I need to know now, and what I need to do now, is I need to really understand the political structure. First off, I hate politics. I hate it even more now. But the DAs, the people who choose how policing happens, and understand who's done what in the past and who's willing to do what in the future, and hold those people accountable. So it's now about how can I put in those few hours of research and really understand the candidates all down the line. And that's something that I want to do, because that's the thing that I can do, where I can write a note, follow in, check in on the people that are making these decisions that are impacting our communities.
And I it's important. And I know sometimes when you bring up voting to Black people, they recoil, and people want to talk about how this system has oppressed us. Nobody's denying that, but voting, it's even more than voting. It's not about voting for the president. You need to know, especially in New York, how judges are selected. By the time that judge's name is on the ballot, there has been a district leader who has handpicked that person to go on the ballot. So it's deeper than just showing up to vote. Know what your district is. Know who your district leader is, because they're the ones that are interviewing judges. They're the ones that are inviting judges to events. So when people are trying to shake jury duty responsibilities and then question why certain verdicts are the way they are, or why this particular judge is on the bench, it's been in place a year before that person is on the ballot. So it's not about just showing up on voting day. You need to know who these people are and who puts them there. So,
and I just to that as well. People post all the time on social media or whatever. Make sure you vote. Make sure you vote. Make sure you vote. But we don't actually educate people on the people that we are voting for, and people aren't taking the time to actually educate themselves. So maybe this whole conversation is just going back to education. We need to start educating people on the people that they are voting for, not just saying go vote.
So I work with 2 platforms, right? And I'm not a politician, I'm not into politics, but I took on a media manager platform just this weekend for Revolt TV. And I need to study politics myself, because part of my role is following this election to educate our people. And I'm kind of scrambling. I hit up all my mentors, I hit up Griselda, like I hit up all my strong leaders. Like I'm taking on that role, and I also work with the Girl Mob. And it's like we need to push our media companies to educate our people on politics, on the full process, on before the November election, all the other smaller elections. Because to your point, and to Mr. Adams' point, I usually just go with whatever my family has been voting, you know? When Obama won, that was probably the only election that I felt connected because it was a man of color. I canvassed. But outside of the Obama election, I don't know politics. And now I'm in a position where I could be a media manager and I can support that. But like, I need y'all who know this to like give me the resources. I'm doing my homework as well. I've been studying, but I have 2 platforms that reach people, Vault TV and the Girl Mob. That can make a difference in this election. So, you know, I'm in media. So anyone who wants to support and guide me in the right direction. I don't think this is like a Democrats versus Republican. I think for me, it's about people making sure that they understand, like you guys said, you know, who picks these judges? How are the community boards working? How can we get more community organizations to promote community boards? Or how can we get more cross partnerships for more visibility, because there also isn't a lot of visibility. All those you know, vote, black squares and vote, that's not enough. I'm sorry, but our people don't really understand that kind of language. They don't understand a black photo and a go vote thing. Like that's not educating. So all I'm saying is I have the position now. I'm gonna do my job, and anyone who wants to support me, I have 2 platforms. I'm here.
I was gonna add as well, I think that all of you have hit the point straight on, especially Alana. I think that it is not enough to just, by the time we vote, we've already allowed everyone to make the choice for us. And the reason why people don't want to be involved is because they don't see themselves in the candidates that are running, nor do they see how they're gonna connect with them. When everything that happened, I think in a few weeks ago, I think I came to a self-realization of, oh my God, I need to get involved, and I need to make sure that the people around me are involved in the political process. Like we need to be the ones dictating who is going to be running, and are those people reflecting our values and our ideas and what we need for our communities. As if we continue to let that be on the hands of the people that continue to have the power, we're not gonna get anywhere. So how I think I'm gonna take it upon myself to educate myself and others on how do we get involved in the political process from the beginning, not just when everyone decides that they're going to be running for whatever position of power they have.
I love all the unity. I hate to bring up a topic, but I would be remiss if we didn't have all these people in this room and we didn't talk about probably the most disturbing thing that we've seen as a collective community this week is the video from the Heights, where you had a group of young Black men seemingly come into the neighborhood in Dyckman. And seemingly, I don't know that they were there to do that or not, but let's assume they were, come into the neighborhood to destroy property was the assumption. And you had this mob of Dominican men that recorded all these videos calling them niggas, saying that we don't do that over here. We do that in the Black neighborhood, not over here. There's a part of me that recognizes that that's ignorance, but it's also a thought that I want to know in 2 spaces. It seems like everyone here is extremely educated. So we have the conflict of Black people of a certain socioeconomic and educational privilege disconnecting themselves from understanding why somebody that may have been underemployed in the first place, that now hasn't worked for 10 weeks and is living in subpar housing with subpar access to resources and just has this constant sense of rage, when we have healthy tools like access to good mental health and education and know how to process our feelings, those people do not know how to do that. So rage is what they have. So I think that we would miss an opportunity here if we didn't talk about, one, what we all felt as our identities allow it when we saw those videos, And two, how do we combat that level of ignorance? Like, yes, I support you protecting your neighborhood. Don't tear down the neighborhood you live in. That is not productive for anyone. But how we talk to those young men that somehow felt in that moment it was niggas coming to tear their community down, as opposed to everybody was the same, but you could have educated those young men that this is not what we don't do this shit in our own neighborhoods. And I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody by cursing, but I think that it's a good topic to discuss in this space.
Yeah, so my sister and I, we hosted a discussion about this on Wednesday, and it's been viewed by almost 30,000 people. And the sheer numbers show that there is a need for these conversations about the dynamics present in that particular incident. So apparently that particular beef has been squashed. You know, the dude on Dykeman apologized, but quite honestly, as a Dominican woman, when I saw the small clip and I heard what happened, I wasn't surprised, you know, and that's the truth. I wasn't surprised that there were some Dominican men spewing anti-Black verbiage and threatening these Black men, you know, with violence, not just to protect the community against, you know, looting, quote unquote, but also I know that it comes from a very deep legacy of, again, anti-Black racism. I mean, as a Dominican, I can tell you quite honestly, and I know that Ghislaine, Vanessa, Nidia, we definitely feel the same. I'm ashamed when I see those things among Dominicans because it overshadows the immense amount of other Dominicans, the majority of us that are loving of anyone and are definitely embracing of our African identity and are definitely in support of a larger movement like the Black Lives Matter movement. But I think education. Somebody just sent me, I don't know if someone has saw it, this has gone viral. This Dominican man, he's literally foaming at the mouth. Has anybody seen it? Calling Black people monkeys. And he doesn't understand why Dominicans are supporting Black Lives Matter, calling us traitors. You know, it's a deep and ugly history. And I've been, in a sense, on the front lines of trying to dismantle this type of like hate among Dominicans for almost 20 years. And I'm really happy to see the younger generation stepping up. But it's old. It's really old. And the same way that as a people, Black people in the US, we're confronting white supremacy and trying to dismantle this beast. And how do we even like embrace it? How do we start getting at it like David and Goliath? Sometimes Dominicans, we feel that way about the anti-Blackness that exists among our own people. And the best that I can do is, you know, provide a platform, provide information, because I think that bottom line, there's a lot of miseducation. Like Jaramanji, you mentioned Marcus Garvey. A lot of people don't know that Marcus Garvey's right-hand man was Carlos Cooks, and he's a Dominican man. He is the man that coined Buy Black, you know, in the late 30s and early 40s in Harlem. He's the one that we credit with coining the term buying Black, a Black Dominican man born and raised in Dominican Republic, you know, and then coming to the US and joining this movement because he saw himself, he was treated as a Black man in DR, treated as a Black man in New York, you know, and that's a very small tidbit, but it's an important one to look at, that not knowing that, like those dudes on Dykeman, not knowing that, and a lot of other things intentionally, because those educators that are in the house, we know that this is intentional, certain things being left out of our curriculum. It just spews that level of hate. So I'm here because of that. You know, I'm an educator, I bring it. I'm tamed today, seriously, because with my students, I bring it and I'm just like, you're gonna wake up or you're gonna wake up when you're around me, but I'm one person. You know, they come into my classroom and then they go into a community that is like, you know, dembow and hip hop and dropping M-bombs. They wanna be Black, but then when it's time to be Black, they're like, nah, I ain't Black. You know, and like Kwamuni says, everybody wanna be a nigga, but don't nobody wanna be one, right? Until it's time to be.
When it's convenient.
Right. Right. And I'm just like, no, you can't cherry pick. You can't cherry pick. No.
Griselda, whenever I walk into a classroom and hear the words, I'm Spanish, I pull out a globe. And that's the beginning of my introduction to the students.
You are not Spanish. That's just a trigger to me, because I'm like, you are not Spanish. That's like calling a Trinidadian British or Black people in the US British. But again, knowing the history, that I studied incessantly. That's a ploy that was drilled into the minds of Latin Americans to get them to distance themselves from Blackness. The Haitian Revolution, 1804, significant moment in history, world history, Black history. It scared the shit out of these white people. And they were like, if they rose up, that means the people next to them, Dominican Republic, are gonna raise up, and then it's gonna be like a domino effect. Jamaica, and then Puerto Rico, and then that's where the propaganda started. Where they were like, we gotta pump these people with this belief that they are whiter than Haitians, they are whiter than their own selves, and that's where the brainwashing happens. You know, it's very much about this fear that another Haitian revolution is gonna happen.
I just wanted to make a comment because I heard myself speaking when you said you pull out the globe and like point to Spain, and because you know my kids are always saying, oh, that Spanish girl or this Spanish girl or I'm Spanish, and it's not just within the Latino community, it's within the Black community too. Oh, she's Spanish, and I'm like, no, she's not Spanish. Like, she's Dominican, she's Puerto Rican, she's Mexican. Like, you need to know your geography. Like, where did this person come from? Like, they might have, you know, Spanish ancestry, but they're not, you know, Spanish. Like, don't just say they're Spanish because they speak Spanish. You know, that's like calling me English because I speak English. I'm not from England, you know. So I just connected with you on that one.
There was a documentary I watched where they show that in Latino countries, everyone puts their African grandmother in the closet, and they all talk about how proud they are. Oh, my grandmother's from Spain, and I just posted on the chat. But I took a DNA test, and I always believed that I had some Spanish background on me. It just so happened that I had 0% Spanish. Actually, the little bit of European ancestry that I have is from Italy, which makes no sense. But it just goes back to how we subscribe to these ideals of race and just what our background is based on what people are telling us, when in reality, like in our blood, it may not even be the case.
Actually, Navia, I've seen like artwork, like really, really ancient Italian artwork with Black people. So I will open you up to do some history and research around ancient Italian people that were actually Black. So I think it might make some sense once you get into that history.
There's
connects
a city in Italy called Bari, Bari, and technically it was believed that if you were anywhere south of that city, you were considered Black because of Italy's proximity to the continent of Africa. So Southern Italians have Black blood.
So I was going to say that's the issue with Sicilians. A lot of Sicilians are excluded because they're basically perceived as being Black and brown because they are.
Yeah, I went to Sicily, and when I went through their immigration, the officer put his arm up against mine, and he's fair skinned, and he was like, you see, we're the same color. We weren't, but that's how they identified. So
it's interesting.
That's interesting.
So I know I saw Vanessa asking on the chat about these different terms. You know, I teach ethnic studies, and in that I teach these terms, and you know, I try to create a space where my students don't get too obsessed with them, because at the end of the day, we're so much bigger than these terms. But the way I tell them is like, we live in a matrix that operates on these terms. Like the census is very much, my sister just taught me that, you know, she's a professor of like urban studies, that if you check other in the census, it's automatically counted as white. I didn't know that, you know? So think about all the Latinos that check other, because they're confused. All of a sudden Latinos are confused. But in my opinion, if Black wasn't a category, I think that the confusion will be less profound, because everybody will be more at ease. But it's the like nervousness, like they want to put me in a Black box, that really gets a lot of Latinos and Asians. You know, we can open the conversation, but you know, Hispanic is an identity that a lot of Latin American people in the Northeast, we don't identify as, because Hispanic was created by the US government in the late 60s, when Mexicans and Puerto Ricans, Mexicans been here, like Sylvia, this, like you said, this is Mexican land, especially southwestern United States. But especially when Puerto Ricans came after World War II, the US was like, what are we gonna do with all these people? And they created the term Hispanic, you know, and that's technically, it's a term that is associated with people from Spain. So a person from Spain is Hispanic. Latino is different. Latino, even though people say it's problematic because it's still rooted in like Spanish and the Latin language, but it's something I identify with. It was created for the people and by the people, especially during the civil rights era. It's really confusing, you know, because the words are used interchangeably, but just like some people identify as Black politically, for a lot of Latin American people, at least in the Northeast, we identify as Latino as a political thing. And it's definitely geographic. But then when you go to Latin America, like Nidia said, she wasn't Latina until she came to the US. Latino is not like a thing that people in Latin America like embrace really. They started embracing it transnationally when we started migrating and going to the US and then coming back with these terms. But everybody identifies with nation. People are from DR, they're from Guatemala, they're from Belize, they're from Peru. But Latino is like a very US. So when I was in Syracuse, West Bubblefuck, in a predominantly white school, there were a lot of Latin American people. And a lot of people thought that I was Latin American, and I constantly had to correct them like, no, I'm Latino. It's a very different experience to have your roots in a US context. I mean, it's so complex. And then when we get to race, Latinos are like, what race am I? And I'm like, this is the conversation we've been having for 2 hours. Like, what is identity? Is identity who you think you are? Or is identity what people think you are? Like,
it's so nuanced. I've had that conversation so many times about Central America and just even Caribbean people. Like, and I think it ties back to slavery because there's even a conflict within Black Americans versus West Indians, right? Or Caribbean people, where it becomes a matter of like, American Blacks have been robbed of a country that owns and accepts them as their own. Whereas if you're from Haiti, if you're from Belize, if you're Trinidadian, like you often hear us say, if you're Jamaican, if you're going back to your country, you're going home, right? There's a home, there's a place that accepts and embraces us and everything about us as us. And European countries do it too, right? In France, there's no concept of a hyphenated thing. You can't be Franco-American. You're French or you're not. And that's it. So nationalism in the United States has become such a weird thing where it's like, I think that children of the diaspora, like you recognize this idea that like America doesn't want me. So it's almost like, thank God I have a place that wants and owns me, where I have a people that understand me. I mean, Caribbean people are some of the most united people ever. We have our internal fighting, but West Indian people, there's a universal culture. You might call it a fritter. I might call it a Johnny cake. Like all of it is universal. There's a accent. Like Jamaicans are the only people that sound Jamaican, right? Bajans sound one way, Trinis sound one way, but in America, everybody that speaks Spanish gets looped into one. But if you speak Spanish, you understand that Mexicans don't sound like Puerto Ricans at all, not even a little bit. So I think that nationalism and colonialism have so much to do with the stuff that we're trying to untangle and unpack. And it's heavy and it's burdensome, but we just have to keep working because it's layers and layers of this onion that we're going to be peeling back, like probably for our entire lifetimes, to be honest.
Guys, I just wanted to make one quick comment, simply because I also know that we're coming up on 4 o'clock. Over this past half a quarter, with the exception of my wife, and being right now in a predominantly white institution, I felt very lonely over the past couple months, and especially when COVID-19 took place and there was a shelter in place, I felt extra lonely because even the people that I should have been talking to, my people and my classmates, that all fell apart when we weren't able to actually see each other face to face. And so I say all that to say that in this conversation, I have not felt alone, and I just wanted to thank you all for that experience because. I often have discussion with Vanessa back and forth where I tell her it's hard for me to feel happy, that happiness, you can't even know happiness without sadness. So I would never just want to feel one emotion. It's almost like a drug. But I told her my goal in life going forward, as I keep reaching these hurdles, is to just find moments of joy. Because rooted in this work is sadness. And I can't do this work and only be happy. And so I just wanted to thank you guys for this moment of joy.
Okay, guys, it's already 4 o'clock and I don't want to push it too much. I mean, if you want to stay, we can definitely stay. I don't mind at all. But if you have to go, I understand that you have to go. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to be sharing a link. And this link is a form that I'm putting together. It's intended to collect and disseminate resources to assist not only the Latino community, but the Black American community too, into taking action. So please take some time to check it out, circulate this form in your social media. I want to have a list of like Black-owned businesses, elected officials, voter guides, health or wellness, anything that we need in order to stick together, heal, grow, learn, anything that you can share it here in this link. I'm sharing it again. I just want to end with one quote from Dick Gregory. He says, "We exist in a culture that invalidates a Black person's greatness. We have to rewire so much of our brain's coding." So I want you to go home and maybe journal, how can you start to rewire your own brain coding? And how can you help other people get there as well? So thank you so much for being here. If you have to go, have a beautiful afternoon. If you want to stay and continue the conversation, you can stay. I appreciate each and every one of you. This conversation will be available for you to do again if you wish. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting.
Vanessa, can you share a contact sheet with everybody who's on here, a contact sheet with everybody's information so we can contact? Thank you.
Sounds
You
good.
had that slideshow before, if you can share, because that'll help with face and contact.
Sounds like
Everybody, please stay safe.
So nice meeting everybody.
Very nice.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
All of you.
Thank you, guys.
I wanted to piggyback on what Shakira was saying. So I lived abroad for 11 years. I taught Spanish for most of that. And I was continually asked for guidance on trips to Spain. I'm vacationing. I'm going to go to Spain for the summer. I never once claimed that I was from Spain. I've been there twice in my life. And were it not for my accent in English, people might not associate me with being from the US. And so I want to, go further with all these layers that we're talking about. Like we've talked a lot about the domestic layer, right, in our communities. And somebody touched upon traveling and the importance of travel. In the 11 years that I lived abroad, I can count on one hand the number of US Latinos that I came across. I was the only US Latina expat. Oh no, it was the second one. The other person also happened to be named Sylvia and also from California. And I remember distinctly December 2009. I went to a play. I lived in Hong Kong at the time. And there was a play called Sister, Sister. And as I sat in the front row and I saw this play interpreted by Black American women, Afro-Latina, I began to cry and I couldn't understand why. Until we had the Q&A and I thought, oh my gosh, this is the first time that my America is being represented in this context. So I go back to responsibility, wishing, hoping, how we get to change narratives in our community, in our states, in our country, but also abroad. What is being sold abroad is that America is a white America. And I absolutely am not calling for any more murder, but it has been this that has created an entire movement, a global attention to the fact that there are other Americans other than white Americans. And it's a different lived experience, and to see that that is actually taking place around the world in some way gives me hope that maybe the face of America is changing. And so whatever it is that we can do collectively, count me in.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sylvia. I'm a super traveler. Like, I try to go as many places as I can. Anywhere I've ever thought of going, I probably wrote it down, and I'm probably gonna go there as soon as, all this airplane stuff stops. But I have noticed when I travel, depending on what country or what continent I'm in, a lot of times people will say, they don't like Americans here. So my color is actually an advantage when I travel, because what I've noticed is that people sympathize and empathize for me, knowing that I'm Black and from America. It's like, oh, sorry. I remember traveling to Cuba in 2016, and I sat at a table with Germans and Australians, and we all joked about this person running for office, who now is the president of the United States. And there was just this empathy for Americans of color. So I think traveling really has just totally broadened my thoughts on any and everything. I mentioned in the chat earlier, I went to an HBCU, and I think that was one of the first steps to just broadening my thought process, being in a different geographic location. I think as New Yorkers, I'm a New Yorker. I know not everybody on here is, but because we're around so many nationalities, we think we got it, I know everybody. But when you go to another geographic location in America, it's a whole nother conversation. And somebody who was in the chat earlier said how they were able to tell what country people were from. I now have an ear for what part of America people are from, because I know accents. I know LA, I know Louisiana, I know a little bit of Indianapolis, I know Chicago, I know Florida, I know Georgia, I know Philly. So it's interesting when you even travel within the United States, how you start to think differently about people, about things, about laws. There's some things that make more sense in the South that don't make as much sense, here in New York City. But one of the things that, we keep talking about education and we keep talking about kids, one of my long-term projects is to take children who have never traveled outside of the United States and their parent, because that was a link somebody said earlier. We can teach all the stuff we want to the kids, but what I noticed in an organization that's, pretty popular in Harlem is this whole, you do well, we'll send you somewhere. And then what happens is these kids end up going away, having these broad experiences, and then coming back to a community that's now looking at them like, oh, do they think they're better than us? Do they think, so I would love to be able to take parents and children to a place that has a certain level of cultural awareness, just to broaden their horizons in life. You know what I mean? Like, travel is education as far as I'm concerned. So thank you for sharing that about travel. I think it will change your life. When people go to the other side of the world, it totally shifts thinking about everything.
I wanted to speak on the whole travel thing as well. And Kristen, you had brought up something earlier about Black Americans being very lost. And I'm going to speak from my personal experience. As an African American, I have traveled a lot. I lived abroad. I lived in Spain for 3 years. And I remember traveling from Spain to Paris with a friend. And as we know, Paris has a huge African population with people from various countries in Africa. And we met some people from, I can't remember what exact countries they were from, but we were having conversations with them. And one of the questions came up, so where are you from? And we were like, oh, we're from America, we're from the United States. And they're like, no, but where are you from? We're like, oh, Pennsylvania. They're like, no, but where? We're like, really? And they're like, no, but where? And then it really clicked that they were asking us, what they were getting at is where are your parents from? Where do you come from? Basically, what part of Africa do you come from? And they didn't really understand the whole story of the African American experience, with all slavery and how, our history is very diluted. There are no records, of where we come from. And that's an identity issue that we have within ourselves, because we can't say, oh, I'm Nigerian, or oh, I'm from Ghana, or whatever country in Africa. So that really opened my eyes too, that like, even within myself, like and that's why I have a problem with saying that I'm African American, because I have a problem with that term, because that's basically lumping Africa, like Africa is a continent. It's not one country. So you're basically lumping all African countries together and not acknowledging and recognizing the different cultures in the different countries within Africa. So that's why I don't necessarily like to say that I'm African American. I say Black American. And also because what Gayla said, because I live the Black American experience. I'm not someone who is, their parents are from a country in Africa, but they were born here in America, who they still have that connection to their home country in Africa. And I don't have that experience. So that was really eye-opening for me when, you know, they asked that question. So I like had to self-reflect and like, you know, that I really don't know where I come from. Like, and that's a struggle for me, and probably for a lot of, you know, quote unquote African Americans.
So Maurice, I think you made a really interesting point, simply because I mean, I at least even when I went to undergrad, you know, a couple decades ago, the population of people at undergrad were more African than they were Americans, or even West Indians, or a lot of Jamaicans also in these schools, because they probably, you know, come from well-to-do families, went to boarding schools, et cetera, et cetera. But specifically, I had an experience out here where we met with a bunch of Africans, and they don't like the term African for the very reason that you just stated. So I've now subscribed to saying someone, you know, a person from the African continent, because at least that does a better job of putting the person. But, you know, they go from one being from Zimbabwe to all of a sudden coming here and being African. They're not even being African, they're just being Black. And so it's like they're on that ship all within 1 month. You know, let alone our whole history of being, you know, on that ship. They're on that ship all in 1 month, going from being from one tribe even. They were actually talking about tribal experiences of how you name their kids, to now being from a country, to being from a continent, to now just being, you know, a complexion. And I think that's something to note as well.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that they all get lumped together. That's another thing I notice with my students when they are from Africa, and I say, where are you from? They say Africa. And I go, Africa has 54 countries, but they're so used to people just calling them African until they have started to just erase whatever place it is that they're from. But it's so funny when you say, you know, what your experience is. Somebody shared earlier how when they really got into the drums, that's how, you know, they were around Puerto Ricans, they felt so connected to culture. I've done African dance since I was 5. And so I've always been surrounded by drums. I've learned from people from Senegal, people who are from Ghana, people who are from Ivory Coast. And so I've always felt a connection, but it didn't hurt that anytime I was around anyone who was African, they were asking me which part I was from. It was never like, are you African? It was, where are you from? And then they would prod, just like what you said. I would be like, you know, New York. No, where are you from? And I'm like, well, my mom's from Florida, my dad's from South Carolina. And then it would be like, no, where is your family from? I'm like, I don't know, somewhere in Africa, right? Now I did do the DNA test, so I feel so much more confident now running down all the countries of places that I'm from. It makes me feel really good. But one of the other things that I noticed when I was traveling and how people tend to look at the US is my dream was to go to Madagascar. I went to Madagascar in 2007. I just did like a whole Africa tour. I was like, I'm gonna go anywhere I ever wanted to go in Africa, and I still got to go back and go to more places. But I got on a bus with this guy. He was from somewhere in Europe, and he said to me, yeah, you're from America, right? So you don't speak any other languages than English. And I was like, are you telling me, or is that a question? And he was like, Americans never speak more than one language. And I said, well, actually, I speak Spanish and I speak Japanese. And he's like, oh, okay. So, you know, something similar happened to a girlfriend of mine who went to the Seychelles Island. The other side of traveling while Black, when you're not speaking to people who empathize with Black people, is you are speaking usually to microaggressive racists. And so there's always a question of, how did you get here? How did you afford to travel to this place? And it's a real slick, underlined way that they do it. But it's always like, oh, are you in school? You know, and you kind of want to turn around and say, what exactly is your question? What are you really trying to ask me right now? So that racism does travel with us. But I do feel like there's a different kind of appreciation for Blackness outside of America. And that's another reason I think it's so important for Black people to travel. Yes, sometimes it's borderline fetishization. We have all experienced that, you know, people of color when we travel outside of the US. But there's also a certain level of respect and reverence depending on where you go. So, you know, even in this climate right now, I'm just looking at a list like, I need to get out of here. Like, what? Give me the list of countries, because there's so many other places I would rather be than here right now.
My passport is so pissed at me. My passport is so pissed at me. You don't even know. It's not even my fault.
I remember traveling to South Africa. Gayla and I went to South Africa with another friend, and we were like in one of the malls in South Africa, and we were just curious, so we went up to one of the ladies working in the store, and we were like, "Did you think that we were like from a different country, or did you just assume that we were South African?" And she was very honest. She was like, "No, I just assumed that you were South African until I heard you speak."
Mm-hmm.
And so that was very comforting too, that they just didn't assume that we were like foreigners just, you know, visiting South Africa, that they actually like, you know, kind of like accepted us as them, you know.
I think with traveling also, one of the questions was like, how do we heal, or how do we move forward together? And I think travel is a part of that. Like education in traditional sense, yeah, we know that you get your education, you learn, you bring someone with you. But I think education is a big part of that, to see how others live, whoever the other is, to see how Blacks live in other places. And also not just to travel, but to bring that back. Like, I'm a native New Yorker. I'm New Yorker to the bone. You can't tell me anything about it. But what does that mean if I'm not bringing someone along with me? And it doesn't even have to be the kids that I teach. It can be anyone. Like, my mom is a Southern Black woman that really didn't go anywhere till I became an adult. I mean, she sent me everywhere because she knew that I had to have a different experience than she did. But when I became an adult, I was like, no, come along with me. You should have this experience too. You shouldn't work all your life and not know nothing, anything outside of, you know, New York. So I think a part of the healing process is also bringing people along with us once we get those experiences, and not just keep them for ourselves. Because a lot of times what we do is we hate where we are so much. When we go away, it was like, oh, I'm just going to go away and stay away, right? So a part of that for me was, I went away to school. I went to school in Florida, very Black and white. Kristen, I think you said you went to FAMU? Rattlers all day, baby, Rattlers all day. But it was, initially I wasn't going to come back, but when I came back, it was the best decision I ever made. And to come back and to teach children that look like me, that was a very conscious decision, because I didn't have a lot of Black teachers, you know, and it wasn't until I got into high school that I was like, oh, there are other things outside of this New York experience. So I tried to bring that back. So that's a part of also bridging that gap and having other experiences just set for the traditional way of being educated.
I agree. Vanessa, I want you to talk more about that. Latino world travel.
And that's one of the reasons why I created Latino. Well, there are a couple of reasons. I wanted to feel represented in my culture, in traveling, and have Latinos have that experience of going outside their own cultures, because what I've noticed is that Latinos mostly travel to visit family, and that's it. And they don't even explore their own countries at all. They just go to visit family. So how can I take them to another level of getting to know who they are and getting to know other cultures around the world, so they don't feel that that they are the only ones that exist? Like, don't live in that bubble. The world is too big. So that's why I wanted to create Latino World Travelers, so we can also be represented in the travel industry. We always see white faces in all those pictures in travel and tourism. And recently now there is a big push for Black people too, so which is amazing. I'm like, yes, finally, we're breaking ground. But now how can also we introduce Latinos? And what I've confronted sometimes, what I've seen is that when I try to celebrate my culture, then it feels like if I was invalidating other cultures. And that's not the case. I'm not invalidating other cultures. I just want to bring my culture to the top too. So those are some things that I've witnessed. And I also want to eventually, since I was a high school teacher for 10 years, I travel with my students internationally. And that's one of the highlights of my career as a teacher, 10 years. Seeing those kids experiencing new cultures and going beyond their comfort zone. Like we used to teach in Chinatown. Well, Gayla is one of my colleagues. And the kids, even though they were allowed to go outside for lunch, they will not eat the food outside. They're in Chinatown, the largest Chinatown in the world. People travel to this Chinatown just to eat their food, to experience the area, and they will not eat it. So what did I do? I planned a trip to China to change their minds. Like, look, China is beautiful. The food is amazing. The people are great. Sometimes what the media puts out there is not correct. And that applies to everything, because Latinos don't travel to Latin America because they think they're going to get kidnapped or like the drug lords or whatever. And it's like, yeah, some areas, but not all of them, not all the countries. So how can you dismantle those beliefs in our kids and in their families? So when the kids came back from that trip from China, they were sending me pictures. Miss, I went to this new place and I'm trying this food because I tried it there and I liked it. And now I'm trying it here too. So I was, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to do. Experience new things, and don't say you don't like something until you try it. Don't tell me I don't like that and then you haven't even tried it. How did you know? So
that's education. That's education.
Yes, and one of the things that I want to do eventually is create a nonprofit that is part of Latino World Travelers, to take those kids to travel to Africa and also to Latin America, both. Because what I've noticed is in the curriculum for global history, even though it's a 2-year course, they concentrate very little on Latin American history. 2 weeks max, even though it's a 2-year course. So my school, for example, was, I believe, 50% Latino students, and they were learning their history in 2 weeks. So that is wild. So I want to create an organization to take kids to get to know themselves, their own culture, so they can have an appreciation for their own culture, because everything stems from not knowing who you are, not knowing where you belong. Am I from there? Am I from here? Where am I from? Well, first learn your own history, and then you could start deciding who you want to be. So.
And the president's not helping, right? The president is villainizing all people from Latin American cultures as much as he's villainizing. I mean, his platform was about building a wall. So he has a lot of issues. I think Biden is the leaser of the evils, which is, I hope we don't do what we did with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders again. Lord knows we can't afford that. I can't afford 4 years. And, I can't do it.
I'm wondering if anybody in the chat wants to chime in, because it's just been us, but I see everybody's commenting. I mean, it's not so many people anymore, so I know everybody had a lot to say. I would love to hear.
Jessica, what do you sound like?
Jessica.
I know what you think.
Hi.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. How are you guys?
Feeling uplifted.
Good. I'm happy to hear that. Now I feel shy. It's easier to type. This is like nerve-wracking for me.
It's less people. That's why I was like, maybe, Estelita, I see you, girl.
Well, why did you join this conversation?
When? Did you ask when?
Why?
Oh, why? So I study African, Puerto Rican, and Latino studies at my school. And I stumbled upon it. And it changed my whole life completely. Like, I never had learned about my own history. And it was like, I can't explain how many times I cried. Like I don't. That's like the best way that I can portray that to you. So I'm light skinned, but my mom is dark skinned and my dad is light skinned. And the anti-blackness in my family is so deep. Like I grew up around that my whole life, but I grew up in the Bronx, so all my friends were black. And naturally, like I drew into that culture, which is part of my culture too, but I didn't have the tools to see that because in the educational system that I was receiving, I didn't exist. Like literally, I remember learning history and I'm like, oh, okay, there was a black and a white America. So like where were Latinos? You know, and it it perpetuated this separation that I already felt because my family was so anti-black. And so I didn't like understand until I got into school why they were anti-black but still looked black. And so yeah, so it's been a lot of dismantling. Like now I have the tools to have conversations with my family and be like, let me explain to you why you're clearly black, but you feel this type of way. And it's a struggle, but I'm here for it. And yeah, so these conversations help me because one, I have people who understand. When at home, sometimes it feels like a battlefield within my own home, and also giving me more insight to add on to my studies, you know? So thank you guys so much. Like this is so important to me. And I hope it continues. I will definitely continue as best as I can in whatever platform I take on professionally. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Estelita, would you like to share too, or Suchil?
Sochil, yeah, that's me. I don't know if y'all can see me or hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. Yeah, I came into it. I don't even know how I found you. Never followed you before, but I found it, and so I thought I would listen. But I'm so nervous now.
Thank you for joining.
And oh, hold on. In my family, I'm the Weta, so I'm the white girl. My sister was always the Latina Black girl, whatever that is referred to as. So we always, my sister and I, have these challenging conversations with each other, but not so much with our families. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation. I want to hear you guys out. I want to talk to my family about the same racism or just difficult conversations. My sister actually is also, we're Mexican, and she has been with her man for a while. He's Black. They have beautiful Latino children. And so I care about their experiences that they're going to run into in the future. So that's why I'm participating.
Wow, thank you for being brave and speaking up. Estelita? Okay, if anyone else has anything to share.
Sorry, I stepped away. I don't really
there.
have anything profound to share. As I said in the chat, my family is Dominican, but they left the Dominican Republic for the Virgin Islands to escape racial persecution. So I really identify with some of the stories about the tension between darker Dominicans and lighter Dominicans and finding identity within that. But I think I don't hear a lot of stories like ours where our Dominicanness sort of was
I want to say, it was minimized in the family. We stopped talking about it because it was really, really a painful experience for people. So that's really all I have to offer to the conversation.
Well, thank you for sharing.
It's a very important narrative. So I don't want to minimize it for sure. Because it's something that we talk about, something that Vanessa and I talk about with her being Dominican and me being Black, and what our kids would potentially have to go through. So it's a conversation we all should have, we all want to have. That's why we're here, and the conversation that we should move forward with. And I think there's a bunch of people, I wouldn't put myself in that category, but people like Griselda who studied the stuff, who might be worth having a conversation with if there's indeed a need to have someone talk about it and listen more.
So this is my husband. He's Dominican.
Good evening. Good evening.
He
Good
just
evening,
came
everyone.
in, so he hasn't been privy to the whole conversation. But a large part of our conversation today was just around the relationship that, Latino people have with Black people and Dominican people, and how they struggle with colorism and all the different, So
Okay.
I was like, come over here, holla.
Well, my 2 cents. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate all the work everybody's doing. It's something that I didn't realize until I got older. I'm Dominican, my father's Dominican. It's not something I realized until I got older. Specifically Dominicans, for some reason, in that aspect of it, they, kind of hold themselves a little bit differently. It's tough to understand exactly the impact that this is having generationally. Like, I married my wife and I love my wife. I love my wife deeper than anything I've ever loved anything in my life. So understanding that, it's difficult for me to see what's happening and what's transpiring amongst the, African-American community, for lack of a better term. It's tough to see it, and it's tough to, again, to put myself directly in that line. Like, I work and I have a bunch of kids. I have together we have 6, right? 5. This is a lot. But we're right. So my focus isn't necessarily everything that's happening in society. Like, my focus is getting back to work. I'm in New York. So we had the hardest hit pandemically with the health issue of it. So I was out of work for a while, and then we got back to work, and then not everything is beginning to transpire, because what happened with George Floyd, and rest in peace, and my belief is that God is using what happened with George Floyd to make us move forward. But that's been happening like a lot with our community. Like, that happens a lot. They just shot a boy in New Rochelle last night. They just shot him. Talk about, he pulled the gun out. This happens. It's just that because, it was exceptional. Like, to see what happened with him, and in front of our eyes, it was like lynching. It really was. It was crazy. So that kind of made us go into where we are now. Like, I was just watching the news, and on the Golden Gate Bridge, you got thousands of people who aren't our complexion, who are there holding up traffic. Like, it's not even us. It's just everybody doing it right now. So I get it, and I kind of hurt because I don't feel as deeply as my wife. Like, my wife is in the middle of it.
I'm a revolutionary. I got my Asada Shakur shirt on today.
She's in the middle of it. She's in the middle of it. And I'm trying my best to understand understand and to, you know, but my focus is going to work, and my focus is I work construction. I do high-rise construction in New York. And it's, I don't know, I have a lot of different things I'm dealing with, but I do understand what's happening. And I'm trying my best to be supportive with her and everything she's dealing with, and everything I'm dealing with, trying to get back to work. And, you know, as far as, you know, I'm Dominican, so as far as Dominicans, and there was this dude, I'm not sure if anybody here is from New York, but there was this dude from Washington Heights the other day tripping.
We were talking about it.
Right, like this dude from Washington Heights was tripping the other day on some, you know, and he was being racist, like straight facts. Like he was being racist, like he was on some Cocolo, like he was being crazy. That's not technically the point. Like the point is, this is what, as a people, we've been going through, like African Americans, we didn't come to this country by our choice. None of us are here by our option. We're here, we're making the best of it. It's crazy, like to imagine what we're going through. And for me, we're always on top. I don't mean to take away from anybody's experience, but we're the best at anything they let us in. Like Tiger Woods was the absolute man. Like anything they let us in, we're the best. Like the economy is the economy that America is because of slavery. Like because we did these crops, and now we're not dealing with that. And now we're progressing, but we are emphatically important to the progress of this country. And it's just a matter of, you know, being galvanized. When Dr. King was around, we were galvanized. You know, when Malcolm X was around, before they killed our leaders, Huey P., you know, they had the power to get us together, to be focused, you feel me? And this kind of is giving everyone that opportunity. This, and I hate to say it because I understand that Brother Floyd lost his life in the fashion in which he did. You know, but it's galvanized, like we are together in a fashion that the country's never seen. So me as a person who kind of, I don't know, I'm not leading, I'm definitely following what's happening, you know, so let's just keep leading it in the right direction. You understand? Like I'm definitely not one of the leaders, but I'm definitely understanding that it's important for us to, like, aside from the looting, like, forget the negative aspect of it. Like, we're pissed, so obviously we're gonna loot. Like, we're pissed the hell off, so we're obviously gonna loot. But once we get past that, you know, what's the point? I guess, like you know, let's do it. Like, let's do it. You know, I appreciate y'all once again, and I guess that's everything that was on my mind.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that, and it's exactly like you said. Some of us are leaders, some of us are followers, but all of us at the same time are contributing un granito de arena to this whole movement. And that's what matters. As long as we don't stand still, we are moving forward then. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Yes, thank you. Linda, we see you. We see you, Linda. I
appreciate each one of your experiences that you share, and hopefully we do another one of these in the near future. And have a beautiful evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for doing this, Vanessa.
Thank you.
We have to connect. We have to collaborate on travel.
Absolutely.
All right.
Sorry. Kristen, you had mentioned something about social emotional learning.
Yes. So if you go on the website girlsleadership.org, there's something called the Power Collaborative, and it's for anyone who works with girls, children. It's culturally and trauma-informed teaching. And so it's several exercises, readings, you know, we talk, we do different, you know, the other day we had our first exercise was just introduce yourself with your name and tell us about where your name came from. And so it seemed like the most simple exercise, but, you know, some people were like, you know, I got my name from this person or that person named you. I don't like to use my name, or, you know, but we talked about what that means when you come into a classroom, just simply acknowledging kids and their name. Who are you? What is your identity? We did another exercise where we talked about, it was just like 2 questions. You had to pick a one or a two. And the questions were around, you know, do you do something as an individual? Do you learn better reading individually, or do you learn better with a group? And so after the series of questions, you could tell at some point it was like, how do you think more along collective lines for the community, collective, or are you more of an individual? And not to say one was better than the other, but we acknowledge that based on what culture you come from, America is all the way over here on 100 for independence. And most Latin American countries are all the way over here with community. So what does it mean when we go into classrooms and we're teaching kids America, 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 assimilate, assimilate, assimilate? It's almost like telling them that how they were raised and what's important to them is not important. So I'm gonna teach you in school, it's all about you, and it's all about, you know, yourself and elevating and coming out of here. And then you go back home and it's all about everybody. So it just, you know, it's a lot of awareness going on in the workshop. And I encourage anybody who works with kids, you know, I almost feel like we're probably going to end up doing it just from kids to like corporations. But go on. They definitely have scholarships. Girlsleadership.org. Look for Power Collaborative. Matter of fact, I'll drop it in the chat one more time if anybody wants the direct link. I feel like, oh, there it is. Boom. So if anybody wants to go see the link.
Thank you so
that is
much.
all.
Any
You're
last
welcome.
words from anyone?
I just wanted to say I wouldn't mind also collaborating with Kristen and Vanessa too. Like I take kids abroad every summer. Obviously this summer they got canceled because of, you know, the whole COVID-19, but I was working with an organization called CIEE. You probably heard of it, but I would definitely would like to work with you two as well, just to get more kids of color involved, because I know with this organization that I work with, it is predominantly white Caucasian kids that partake in the study abroad experience. So I would definitely want to get more kids, students of color, you know, to travel and experience life outside of the US.
Absolutely. Yes.
Contact sheet.
Yes, I'm on it. Well, thank you so much, guys. Have a beautiful day, and we will be in contact really soon again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.